Hello, Tim.
Hello.
I'm gonna have to. Oh boy, I'm gonna have to retrain myself in 1 minute on which mute.
Under no circumstance are either of you to unmute your team's microphones.
Well, I have to mute
You
mine.
only use these physical microphones.
Right. He has to leave his open, and I
Yeah,
have
you
to leave
leave
mine
that
closed.
one.
Good, and Derek is regular late, so he'll should be here by 8 o'clock or so. Okay, well, good. I read the requisite language. Ms. Bazemore, would you please call the roll?
Tonight we've got Cameron Garris serving as our planning
no, Ms.
commission
Bazemore.
coordinator.
I'm like a robot. I just things.
Sorry
All
to
right.
point. All right. Chair Krasner,
I'm here.
Mr. Stevens,
Here.
Ms. Teets,
Here.
Mr. Pointes,
Here.
Ms. Weiss,
Here.
Ms. Comont,
Here.
Mr. Hyra,
Looks like Mr. Hyra is absent at the start of the meeting.
Okay, so that's 6 of us, and we're good to go. So we read the requisite information. Before I read the requisite information, this is an aside, Paul. We can talk about it later, but with things beginning to slowly, get better, maybe more than slowly at this point, we should talk about coming back in person at some point in the near future. But we can talk about that offline. But I did hear that they announced that city buildings now masks are optional, and so that's a good sign. And I know the council's been meeting in person at least half the time. So anyway, we can talk about that more later. But hopefully, this is one where we're getting toward the end of having to read these notices. But I will read it because we have to. So we're calling to order the Wednesday, March 2nd, 2022 meeting of the City of Falls Church Planning Commission. The meeting for which this agenda has been posted will be held to and in compliance with the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, Section 2.2-3708 and 2, and state and local legislation adopted to allow for continued government operation during the COVID-19 declared emergency. All participating members of the Planning Commission will be present at this meeting through electronic means, and all members of the public are welcome to view the meeting at our website, which is fallschurchva.gov/PC. You can also view it on Falls Church City Television, which is Cox Channel 11, RCN Channel 2, and Verizon Fios Channel 35. Public comments are accepted virtually. Anyone who signed up to speak will do so via the meeting video platform. In order to speak on a public hearing item or provide general comment, typically you would have had to provide the speaker form in advance at our website, www.fallschurchva.gov/public comment. You'd have to do that before noon on the day of the meeting. I will say, public hearing item we have tonight, have anybody, who is watching, but if anyone's watching and they did not sign up, if you email, and I'll read the email address shortly, and in order to get the link to Teams, want to testify, allow that regardless of if you signed up in advance or not. But if you did sign up in advance, you would have already received the link to log in and testify. Written comments are accepted. Here's that email address, plan@fallschurchva.gov. And if you do that at any time before the end of the meeting, any written comments are sent to us and summarized here at the meeting. And as I said, if you email in order to get a link, testify verbally or virtually, you can go ahead and do that and testify on the public hearing item. Okay, so with that out of the way, we must adopt the agenda. Again, we have one real action item, and then of course the work session. Things seems logical and orderly. So if there's no questions, comments, concerns, I'd look for a motion to adopt the agenda as prepared by staff.
Mr. Chair, I propose that we adopt the agenda for March the 2nd.
Can I, before you
I'll
all act
second.
on that, can I just interject for a moment? We had I think we got it up in one of the versions, but maybe not all of them. We should add that under work sessions, item 7, we're going to have 7A, a work session on the CIP, Capital Improvement Program.
I referenced the work session, but right, yeah, I thought that had been corrected, but yeah, that's right. We are having a work session tonight. Somehow it was on the agenda, it like fell off one of the versions, and then, yeah, but it should be back on. So that's a good catch, Mr. Stoddard. It does include the CIP work session. So we have a motion and a second. Discussion? If not, then roll call vote. Mr. Garris.
Chair Krasner,
Yes?
Mr. Stevens,
Yes.
Ms. Teets,
Yes.
Mr. Fuentes,
Yes.
Ms. Weiss,
Yes.
Ms. Comont,
Yes.
All right. That means we are good to go. Okay, so moving right along as published. No speaker series tonight. At some point we'll have that again. Let's see. Mr. Garris or Mr. Stoddard, any petitions for items not on the agenda? Any comments related to things not on the agenda that came in? Either of you are aware of?
no, they're not.
Okay, thank you. In that case, that takes us to our action items for the evening, and I'll read, since these are the public hearing, or this is a public hearing, and so I will call it as it's printed. Given a second here to actually pull it up. Sorry. Okay. Too many screens going here. Here we go. So this is a public hearing and an action item. This is TR 21-09, which is a resolution to grant a special exception for residential uses within a mixed-use development project and to increase the building height with a bonus of 40 feet to a maximum of 115 feet for a development project on approximately 4.63 acres of land at 101, 91, and 201 West Broad Streets and 150 South Washington Street, and a parcel on South Maple Avenue. The real property code numbers are 52-305-027, 52-305-024, 52-309-119, 52-305-014, and 52-309-116 on application made by Atlantic Realty Companies Incorporated, also known as One City Center. So I think the applicant, are they with us? Are they here? I'm looking at the list of names and just want to make sure that they are with us.
A lot of the applicant team is here. I don't see their attorney. I know he was scheduled to be on with Rec and Parks immediately preceding this meeting, so I'm trying to contact him. Akita, are you on this call? Do you know if Rec and Parks wrapped up?
I am on this call. Let me give Andrew a call.
All right, it. Thank you.
I mean, as long as someone from the applicant team presenting Atlantic is here, we could get started, but it'd be better to wait for their attorney, I suppose, if he's not going to be too much longer.
Well, and Akita is our lead planner, so she's the one that would have been providing our staff report.
Right.
If they're wrapping up, maybe a suggestion, maybe we could jump to, minutes or something to make use of the time while we wait for them to be available.
Could do that. See, Paul, you estimated 7:45, and we blew through those items in 10 minutes, and what happens? Chaos ensues. All right, we could do that. We could take the action items in reverse order. I don't think that's out of sync with our adoption of the agenda motion. So I guess let's table One City Center just ever so briefly and jump ahead to action item on adopting the minutes from our previous meeting, which was February 16th, 2022. Everyone should have those. Are there any comments, questions, edits on the February 16th minutes? Anybody? Not hearing one. This was another.
So I move to adopt the minutes of February 16th.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Second by Ms. Teets. Any discussion on that motion? If not, trying to stall here, Paul. I'm doing the best I can. If not, then we'll have a roll call vote. Mr. Garris.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say, not related to this item, but we do have the information items that we could pull up as well. Those are things we could cut off at any time and resume later.
That's true. All right, well, motion and second. We had no discussion, so we'll do a roll call vote to adopt the minutes. So, Mr. Garris, could you call the roll?
Chair Krasner,
Yes?
Mr. Stevens,
Yes.
Ms. Teets,
Yes.
Mr. Fuentes,
Yes.
Ms. Weiss,
Yes.
Ms. Comont,
Yes.
Okay. Well, we've adopted the February 16th minutes. I do not see Mr. Painter's name in the list of guests.
Mr. Chair, he is actually still at the Rec and Park Board meeting. He said another 10 minutes or so, they're wrapping up.
Okay, that's fine. So we can jump ahead to the information items. I know we just adopted the agenda, but anyone watching, I think, can figure out that we're jumping around in the order based on the fact that the applicant is not present hearing. So, all right. So why don't we jump ahead then to item 8, which is our information items, and the first information item, 8A, would be any planning commissioner reports that people would like to share. Any interesting meetings people attended the last few weeks? Let's see, I'm looking for a little hand up. Mr. Stevens, go ahead.
I don't have any meetings, but I was going to comment briefly on the 2 attachments. Did you want me to do that now, or do you want to wait to see if anybody else has reports on meetings?
It doesn't matter. No, I mean, you could.
Okay. I was going to comment on both of these briefly. The first one has to do with the CACT and the ESC, who composed a letter that outlines some things that they've identified as being important for the city to implement in order to improve bicycling in the city. And I would add that there's also another group that's being formed. Commissioner Comont is also involved with this, that would be kind of separate from a city advisory board. It can be a standalone committee, much like the FABB in Fairfax County or the WABA and throughout the region. I guess we can expect to see more pronouncements on bicycling, which of course I support very much. So I'm hoping that we might even want to endorse that letter. I don't know that would add a whole lot, but it would certainly indicate to City Council that there's fairly widespread support for this initiative. Then the other thing I was going to mention just briefly on the decoupling of the cars and people article, Mr. Puentes. Very, very good article, read with a lot of interest. In fact, it got our attention, those of us on the environmental side, because of the actual data that indicated a decrease in traffic. And we've been focused for the last couple of years on the greenhouse gas inventory that the Council of Governments does for us. And a big part of that study involves modeling of traffic in the city. And they've shown through their modeling process a 29% increase in vehicle miles traveled in the city from 2005 to 2018. So that, is a dramatic disconnect with the VDOT information that you were able to pull out. So needless to say, it's generated some interesting discussion and caused us to have some dialogue with the folks at the Council of Government. So anyway, the bottom line is that it was a great article, and I'm glad you did it and had it published.
Thank you, Mr. C. I just say one thing, just in terms of the data, just the difference between vehicle miles traveled as a measure of distance driven. The data here in this VDOT data in the article was just traffic counts, right? It's just cars driving over one of those bubble counters. So it doesn't really measure the distance that's driven, just the number of cars on the roads.
Right, but the percentage number is the one that really caught our attention. You showed was about a 10% decrease, I think, in the count from the VDOT numbers, and the increase in miles was 29%. So a rather dramatic difference in directionality and size between those two. But any insights or thoughts you have on that, you've already provided a little bit here, but I'd be very welcome to to share your expertise.
Yeah, the problem with the data is it doesn't tell you anything other than just counting those cars. As I think I wrote in the article, since it's restricted mostly to the major commercial corridors, it does seem clear that it's I think some kind of cut through traffic has declined pretty substantially. When I first moved to the city, there was no encumbrance on 29 or Route 7. You can drive right through. It was very attractive, I think, for a lot of people. Now that there actually is life and vitality, and it's not as easy to drive through, it's probably not as easy of a place to cut through anymore. But complete speculation. We don't know some of the details. Since the piece was published, I've talked to a couple of other folks who did their own analysis. And we've seen similar things in other places. So it really wasn't just restricted to Falls Church, but in Arlington, Fairfax City, a couple of other places, Winchester, I think the one, they saw similar things. So, the problem with the data it only tells you so much, but much more investigation to come.
No, I agree. It was an excellent article. I mean, just not the main focus, but there are a few little tidbits in there that I wondered about, like the greater than 10%, the 0 to 10% increase on North Oak Street leading to Mount Daniel. I wonder if that's when we added the second grade over there, or something else that happened in that time frame, and what generated that, as well as some of the other weird ones. Like, I'm really curious what the greater than 10% increase is on. That's Robinson Place. Isn't that where Derek lives? I don't know. He may have something to do with that. I don't know. But anyway, that's a weird little anomaly in the data. I wonder what some of those other little quirks are. But Ms. Coma, your hand's up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I have two things I want to say, but the first is I also really enjoyed this piece. I wondered myself if some of maybe the disconnect that you're talking about, Tim, is due to the increase in, more people in our single family neighborhoods, like residents of Falls Church City, driving. So we have a turnover happening. We have retirees selling their homes to young families who have multiple kids, who are participating in multiple activities, to working parents. I mean, they are traveling in cars a lot more than maybe a single retired person would have been. So I wonder if some of that demographic change that's happening in the city is what's driving it. I would have loved to see this map in like full color. It would be really interesting. I would expect that more of the smaller residential streets have seen increases in traffic. I know that we're hearing from the residents that is happening. We have a lot of requests for traffic calming. So I don't know if there's any way to get that data. I know that we track it kind of intermittently on a request basis. It's hard to compare over time, but that would be my hypothesis. I don't know if you have any ability to look at that, Mr. Puentes, but it would be interesting.
Yeah, this is the total number of streets that for which VDOT collects the data for some reason. Don't know why they
It's
chose.
an interesting collection.
This is all
Anyway.
all they've got. Yeah.
And then the second thing I'd like to say is I would just like to heartily endorse Mr. Stevens' suggestion that we endorse the letter from the CACT and the ESC. And I would be happy to draft something, that we could consider at our next meeting. I am very strongly in favor of, building better bicycle infrastructure in the city of Falls Church. We're 2 square miles. We really have an amazing opportunity to be a biking and walking first city, but it's going to take a lot to get there. So I would be happy to do that if there's interest here tonight.
I think that's a great idea. I don't know what others think, but that sounds like a great idea. I mean, I think this certainly fits in with some of the opinions and the views we've expressed as and developed consensus around in work we've done. So no, I absolutely think that'd be a great idea.
Okay, perhaps I could work with Mr. Stevens then. Mr. Stevens, if you wouldn't mind to draft something that the commission could review next meeting.
Of course. Happy to do that.
Great.
Okay, so any other comments either on those items or any other planning commissioner report? Not, and I'm still looking, I don't see Mr. Painter here yet, so why don't we?
have them now. We picked up the
Ready?
applicant, the attorney, and the architect.
Oh, is he on there? Oh, there he is. He just popped.
Nothing.
He's here. Okay, well.
Sorry, guys.
Yeah, nothing like being late to a meeting.
Okay, all right, well, then we'll flip back to item 6A, and I'm not going to reread the entire long-winded title because we opened the hearing and we kind of tabled it, but now we're picking back up again our public hearing on the One City Center project. So without reading the long title again, we'll go back, we'll circle back to that. And now that we have the applicant team with us, so as is typical, the order of things, we'll start with staff to give us a staff report update on the item that's before us for action tonight.
Thank you, Chair. I'll briefly introduce the item and then turn it over to our case planner, Akita Ruzzi. So this item is before you as an action item, both a public hearing item as well as an action item tonight. This was before you as a work session item at your previous meeting, during your previous work session. The applicant has made some interim changes in response to input from the commission, and I'll let Akita and the applicant speak to those changes. I just want to highlight the timing section. Mr. Garris, if you could jump down to line 276 in the staff report. So this timing section here does detail certainly the engaged process that this project has gone through, with their application being filed in February of last year, going through a number of work sessions with council, planning commission. You can see other boards and commissions listed here. And then it's up for planning commission's recommendation. This is your all's formal recommendation to the council. Following that, the applicant would be expected to make a third submittal that would formalize any interim changes they've made during this boards and commissions engagement process. And then there would be subsequent work sessions with council prior to them taking this up for final consideration. So with that, and not giving away any of the story, I'll turn it over to our case planner, Akita Ruzzi.
Thank you, Paul. Good evening. The applications before the commission for formal action tonight include special exceptions to allow residential use within the mixed-use development and to increase in building height from a maximum of 75 feet in the existing B2 zoning to a maximum of 115 feet. These applications were filed by Atlantic Realty Companies to allow a mixed-use development project at the intersection of West Broad Street and South Maple. The applications were filed in accordance with current city regulations and requirements as provided in the city code. Page 7 of the report provides a summary of the project, which includes a new mixed-use building as well as improvements to existing office buildings at George Mason Square and 150 South Washington. The applications are before the Planning Commission for a recommendation to City Council. The city's process for special exceptions require boards and commission input prior to final consideration by council, and the Planning Commission's recommendation is a mandatory step in that process. The applicant has been engaged with boards and commissions in the last 2 months since referral of the application. The Planning Commission also held several work sessions, latest of which was held on February 16th. The Commission's most recent feedback and the applicant's response are summarized on page 4 of the staff report. Before I get to that, just in terms of next steps in the process, the applicant has received written comments from most boards and commissions, with a few more anticipated in the next couple of weeks. Once they have all of the comments and commission's recommendation this evening, they will make a resubmission of the revised application that formally responds to all of those comments coming out of public review. That submission will also include responses to second round of staff comments. Since the February 16th Planning Commission work session, we received an interim submission from the applicant, as Paul just mentioned. That interim submission responds to Commission's comments along with a revised draft of voluntary concessions. I'll let the applicants speak to their interim submission and their responses, but just to summarize the recent VC updates listed on page 9 of the staff report. Let's see, if we're on page 9, there you go. Some key updates, and I'll just provide some highlights, not everything. Conference space scheduling, added designation of an individual responsible for conference center scheduling. Public parking wayfinding, added a commitment to provide signage at all parking garage entrances to direct pedestrians to public spaces. Special events in Woonruff, added more operational details and clarified the role and involvement of Arts and Humanities Council. Public art, specified that art will be placed on the property. Historic commemorations, added a new provision and commitment to include commemorative installation to reflect historic events and personalities. City Center Park, added a prohibition of artificial turf and Kentucky bluegrass in the park. Maintenance, they added a commitment to maintain the park for the first 5 years. Added a commitment to work with city staff at site plan on soil remediation. Facade upgrades, added language that new windows will meet or exceed the current thermal efficiency requirements of the Virginia Energy Conservation Code. Sidewalk, added language that new utility and junction boxes shall not be located within the clear zone of any sidewalk. Planter bed maintenance, added commitment to maintain all planter beds for life of the project. Short-term parking, added a provision for signage and pavement markings to reserve locations internal to the property for short-term parking. A dockless rideshare bike and scooter parking, added a commitment to designate an area on the property as a centralized storage or parking zone for these uses. Predatory towing prohibited, they added a language that relates to that. Smart parking technology, added a commitment to install such technology to communicate the availability of public spaces within levels 2 and 3 of the garage. Trash and recycling services will be located internally in the mixed-use loading area. Loading area entrance, added a commitment to provide striping and reflective pavement markers to delineate the vehicular travel approach and pedestrian zone. Lead scorecard, agreed to provide a lead scorecard to the city prior to site plan approval. On future solar panels, they agreed to provide an analysis evaluating the mixed-use buildings, on-site renewable, and photovoltaic. Sorry, English my second language, so I have to take my time with that one. Photovoltaic potential prior to site plan approval. EV charging stations, specified that stations will be proportionally distributed among the various uses in the mixed-use building and among the 30 permanent free public spaces. So these are their latest commitments in response to some of the comments coming out of boards and commissions. If we scroll up to line 132, thank you, Cameron. So, okay, I do want to mention the applicant has made notable improvements to the application since it was first filed a year ago, including commitments related to key objectives raised by council. Those include providing public parking at no cost to the city. There was an old agreement obligating the city to pay $300,000 for those spaces, but the applicant has waived it. Further refinement of the facade improvements to George Mason buildings. Total parking count reduced and garage height dropped by a floor as a result. Added additional streetscape and pedestrian improvements. Refined their commercial commitments by adding more specificity and assurance in their VCs. Increased their ADUs to 10% from the original 6%. Increased their EV charging stations to 5% from their original 2%. Committed to $20,000 for bike share annual operating costs. In terms of staff review, a preliminary analysis of the project based on the comp plan, small area plan, and SE review is provided in the referral report. Starts on page 11. The second submission staff comments are also provided in the attachments. Now, there will be additional work and coordination between city staff and the applicant to address those staff comments as the project moves through the process. Some of those comments have already been addressed through interim responses and submissions since the comments were first issued in July. So staff looks forward to their third submission to formalize and incorporate these changes and latest commitments. So I'll get straight to the staff review and analysis. In terms of comprehensive plan consistency, this area is already planned for mixed use on the comp plan and land use map. So the proposed development is consistent with that vision. The comprehensive plan also calls for a balanced mix of uses that reinforces and maximizes pedestrian connectivity and results in a significant market-driven commercial activity center that is supported by residential uses necessary to ensure commercial success. The downtown small area plan recognizes the project site as an area for dense development potential. The site is within the core commercial area, which is an area envisioned for greater concentration of commercial activity that supports density and taller building heights. And the comp plan small area, unlike the comp plan, small area plan also talks about investment in pedestrian infrastructure, walkability, active and vibrant streets with the ground floor commercial uses in the project and the proposed pedestrian improvements. The project begins to demonstrate consistency with some of these goals in the area. SE review, the SE code objectives include consistency with comp plan, increase in commercial square footage and revenue, urban design, environmental sustainability, infrastructure, and affordable housing. They have continued to refine the project in these areas in response to staff and council comments since they first submitted. Some of the recent changes and commitments would be incorporated in the third submission, which will also have the benefit of boards and commission input. Based on staff review of the second submission, coupled with latest improvements, the project does begin to demonstrate consistency with the SC code. I will wrap up with fiscal impact. Based on the staff's updated fiscal impact analysis, the expected fiscal impact is now approximately $955,000 annually, which is an increase from the earlier projection of $706,000. That concludes staff analysis, and staff commission recommend approval of the project to City Council. The proposed motion this evening reflects that recommendation. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Ruzzi. That was very comprehensive. All right, any questions for staff? Any commissioners have questions for staff on their review of the application thus far? Okay. So that was questions for the applicant. All right, well, if there are no questions for staff at this time, Mr. Stevens, your hand, is that a new hand up or is that? You're muted, Tim.
Yeah, sorry about that. I did have a question. Was there an appendix B to the voluntary concessions? I saw it was there, but it was blank. Was there something that was supposed to be added to that at some point?
I believe that was the ESC recommendation and additional environmental measures that was included with the very first VC submission, but I think will be formally submitted again with the third submission. No, so it will have an appendix B, but not at this time.
And that's part of the voluntary concessions document.
Yeah, and maybe Mr. Painter can speak more to it. It's referenced in the VCs too.
Yeah, Commissioner Stevens, so we included it with our initial submission of the voluntary concessions. It has not changed since our initial submission, and we have not updated that appendix with voluntary concessions. So what was provided to staff were just the changes that have been made to the VCs since I believe the Planning Commission would have last seen it.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Well, if there are no other questions for staff, I guess what we'll do now, things are popping up. Ms. Weiss.
Yeah, I guess this is the time for this question. And just the question for staff is, this is another development where we're anchoring the commercial, the anchor commercial tenant will be grocery. And I guess my question for the city is, are we putting too many eggs in one basket with respect to one particular business model of grocery stores when that business model might be changing? And is the architecture of a grocery store adaptable long term? Should we find ourselves in a moment in time 10 to 20 years from now when there's more delivery, more dark stores, less big grocery? How resilient is the city's economic viability if we are anchoring so much of our development around grocery stores broadly, not just in this development? And I don't know if I expect the answer to that, but I think that my question to staff is somebody in the city kind of looking long term at grocery store models and the economic resilience of the city, given how many large grocery stores we're building here?
I can't provide probably a full response, but I'll provide sort of an intro response. And I see Jim Snyder, our Director of Community Planning and Economic Development Services, is also on the call. But I'll just say that I know when the Whole Foods was considered across the street, there was an analysis done by staff to look at, was there enough demand in the region to support Whole Foods? Was it really different from the other markets, the other grocers that were available in the city? And the answer in the staff analysis was yes. That there is enough segmentation in the grocery market, that there was demand that could support a Whole Foods without sort of taking demand away from other stores. At some point, there's going to be some limit reached, but I think that one thing you can look at is that since the market still seems to want to put grocery stores here, that to me anyway is a signal that there's still demand that needs to be served. So that's always a positive sign to take. And I'll leave some of the question for the applicant in terms of what else could go into that space. I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of a 40,000 square foot space. It'll have tall ceilings. It'll have ground level access. It'll have access to parking behind. It'll have access to the loading bay. So I assume it would be a fairly flexible space. But I think that's something that the applicants could speak to about what could go in there. Down the road, if a grocery store wasn't viable, say 15, 20 years into the future. But maybe I'll turn.
That's good. And I'm sorry, I just wanted to clarify my question because I don't doubt that large grocery chains are doing their research and they wouldn't come here unless they saw market demand. Mm-hmm. And I personally demand closer grocery stores to my house, so I can see that. My question is the long-term viability of the grocery store model in light of some new disruptive models for grocery. So it's that 15 to 20 year view that I'm looking at, not current demand, really.
Sure.
Hey, Paul,
Go ahead, Jim.
this is Jim Snyder. If I can interject, is that okay?
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Steiner.
I think one of the things we're seeing is, and just keeping in touch with the grocery industry, there continues to be a strong demand for brick and mortar stores. People certainly appreciate the flexibility of delivery, and they like that. I think the city is a walkable destination with a very good demographic and purchasing power, is attracting top stores. And the grocery business is segmented by stores of different sizes with different emphasis. So we've become a place that they want to be in. And I think you can contrast that with a pattern of development in Fairfax County Bailey's Crossroads, Seven Corners, the areas west of the city, where the land use and the transportation patterns are not attractive for pedestrians, are not focused, and we are benefiting from our urban form. So I think we're the place that people want to be. We also are at the crossroads of two major highways. I think the space that is being built is also very adaptable. It's at an intersection. It's at ground level, supported by parking. So it's hard to say for sure how the grocery industry will adapt, but I think it's probably the most resilient kind of form because this is what people do every day. And I think the development patterns we've had in our small area plans we're reaping the benefit of that by being the first choice for these kinds of stores.
Thank you for that, Mr. Snyder. So you don't see any, sort of saturation point being reached. I mean, just given I totally appreciate your comment about segmentation, and I guess I've commented earlier meetings on this project that it would seem that we have every segment covered. I don't know if the applicant here has mentioned particularly what their focus is for this particular anchor that is somehow different than the other stores, grocery retail stores that we already have or that are in the pipeline. So that was, I think, a concern that I share Ms. Weiss's concern about what the future can we support that? I know we're drawing from well beyond our boundaries.
Yeah, I think it really is important to remember that Falls Church is not 14,000 people. It's the greater Falls Church with over 100,000 people. And we're really at the center of that, our trade area. And I think all you have to do is look at Fairfax County and look at the landform and how things are spread out. You can see why people who are wanting to do projects with mixed use on top of them are going here. This is exactly what happened in Arlington, where, lots of new stores going in, and they're rebuilding them as well because you have the density and the concentration and the walkability. And I think we're in a good place. I think it's viable. And I think the space that's being built is very adaptable and well suited to any future commercial use.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Ms. Coman, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to echo Ms. Weiss's concern about what happens. Mr. Snyder, if all of these grocery stores that we're building were suddenly to shutter 20 years in the future because their business models change. I think that's the concern, right? We've got all these grocery stores now, and it's reassuring to hear that they could be reused maybe as a roller rink or some other kind of large facility. That the other thing that kind of gives me a little reassurance is I feel like there's a trend toward grocery stores becoming kind of third places. I mean, I don't know if you've been to the Harris Teeter bar, but it is very busy. There are numerous people there. So people are going to grocery stores. I think grocery stores, maybe the applicant can speak to this a little bit more, but I think they're trying to sort of broaden the things that they have to offer. So it's not just getting your groceries or other things that you can do there. So just wanted to add that.
There definitely is a social aspect to these things. When I worked in Arlington years ago, we lost a lot of grocery stores when Grand Union quit the marketplace, and the county board made a real effort to let's get more of them. And they have been very successful. We're seeing the same thing here. There definitely are a third place. People like to get out. They like to meet their neighbors. When I first came to the city, we had a Giant, and that was about it. So think of the changes that have been made and the additional value that residents have and choices they have. And we have more population who are living within walking distance. So I think we have an excellent model. I think it's going to be very resilient. This is what we envision for our downtown. So we're very excited that this corner is going to go from a dead bank and a tailor store to a lively grocer who will bring in existing and new customers, and we'll have new customers living nearby in the new buildings. And we're going to revitalize an area that's been kind of stuck for many years. So we're very excited at the economic development level about what's happening on this block. And it's amazing, actually, that what is going on downtown with all the various projects, plus what's happening at the West End. So city's in a very fortunate place.
Okay, thank you for that. All right, let's see. If there are no other questions for staff at this time, I guess we will throw it over to the applicant. I don't know, Mr. Painter, if you had a formal presentation tonight or
I do, Mr. Chairman,
Okay.
and I will try to be brief, because I think we've all heard this, many times over. But I don't know if we could bring up the PowerPoint. We provided it to staff earlier today, but happy to just sort of march through a couple of things. And I echo the same concerns about the grocery and everything like that. I also agree with Mr. Snyder's conclusions. And, it is true about the changing nature of grocery stores. I mean, if you look at them where they are today versus where they were 5 years ago, there's a lot more prepackaged foods, there's a lot more organic foods, a lot more experiential things, be it bars. I mean, certain Whole Foods have full service restaurants, within them. There's a lot more pickup and online ordering. I will also say, too, that the fiscal impact analysis that was submitted initially with the project, when we were not committing to a grocery store, was still fiscally beneficial, over $700 and some odd $1,000 to the city, even without the grocery store. So if the grocery store were to go away tomorrow, the project would still be beneficial. And then also in terms of additional uses, any other use that could go into that space would have to come back before the commission and council for review. So right now it is a dedicated grocery store space. It would take a special exception amendment to change it to something other than a grocery store. But even so, the space could be demised into smaller units. And it's not 44,000, it's 25,000 square feet. So it's not as great of a footprint, or footprint as far as, relative to the rest of the retail in the space. And so again, high ceilings. It'll also be constructed of concrete too. So there's a lot more that you can do with a space of that nature. So I just wanted to mention that. As we can go to the next slide. We're really excited about the project, obviously, and we're happy to be here again. I think we've made a lot of progress and edits based upon the comments that we've received. And I do want to express our appreciation to the commission members and staff for its hard work and suggestions. I step back and look at this project. I think back, okay, what does this represent? And through the entire, we've been at this for about 14 months now, informally in the process, and we've gradually gotten to these goals as we've kind of uncovered them and discovered things and heard feedback. But I think really what it represents to the city is it's an effort to create a true mixed-use community at a core intersection of the downtown that we really haven't had before. I mean, this project has not just residential and retail, but it has office. This is probably the first project in a very long time that has proposed office, and that there's actually something, a chance that it can actually get built. We hope that it will complement Insights Broad and Washington project across the street and really deliver a true walkable, urban, pedestrian-friendly environment where one can meet their daily needs and interests without maybe getting into a car, or even if you are driving, with just one trip. So you can come down to the center of Falls Church and find a variety of things to do. The second thing that I think is important is that, at a time when most folks try to reduce the amount of commercial in a project, we're going the other way. This project really is about substantial new commercial space in a new building, along with the rehabilitation of existing commercial spaces and a much more modern and efficient parking garage. So we have nearly 110,000 square feet of new commercial space, and that's about 66,000 square feet of new retail and 43,000 square feet of new office. And we are providing far more commercial than what's on the property today and better quality. We have large footprint retail with the grocer. We have smaller format retail and restaurant space and office uses. But it's a very tough environment to underwrite speculative commercial space. But this is a project we believe to be viable just given the mix of uses. Third, and we've talked about this before, but we do view this as a positive step in the implementation of the city's longstanding comprehensive planning policies that go back at this point, 16, 17 years as it relates to this site. Fourth, and this is something that's important. We talked a lot about this last time, but we are hoping to deliver a project that exceeds the established housing and environmental sustainability goals that the city itself has set forth. I mean, the city communicates through its policies, its adopted policies, the vision that it wants to see, what it telegraphs to investors, to landowners, and to developers. I think Commissioner Hira had talked about, it's good to have development. It's important to have equitable development. We had a lot of discussion about that last time, but appreciate the focus on that. We are exceeding the city's affordable living policy. Happy to continue having conversations outside the scope of this application related to the quads. We know that's an important thing. In terms of the environmental aspects of the project, we are doing LEED Gold. We've agreed to a 20% increase in building efficiency. We have a variety of sustainability measures that Commissioner Stevens was talking about. We are exceeding the open space requirements, and we've agreed to an additional 20% reduction in the peak rate of runoff from the project too. So, we are delivering on that. We talked about the fiscal benefit of the project, something that's not draining on the city's treasury, which we've talked about. We want to have a well-rounded voluntary concessions package, both in terms of the dollar amount and the breadth of commitments. The project, when you total all of the voluntary concessions using the city's methodology, where they weigh all the mixed-use projects and the commitments made, delivers about $14 million in commitments to the city, which is about $10,000 more per unit than the next highest mixed-use redevelopment project in the city. We're also trying to strike a balance between the different constituencies in the cities, the wants, the desires, the priorities. We're not going to make everyone happy, but I do believe when you step back and you look at it on balance, we believe that what we've thus far presented in our voluntary concession package does represent a well-rounded package of commitments. There's still much left to negotiate in this process and to review, but we think that we're headed in the right direction. And lastly, we are looking to create a project that can serve as a catalyst for encouraging redevelopment and new investment in the city. This is about making a major investment in an area that really hasn't seen much investment since the 1980s. One that could be regionally significant, especially when combined with the Inside project, catty corner to us, the existing inline retail across from us, and then up the street at the Harris Teeter building. And you're looking at an entire area. It's about placemaking, economic development, housing opportunities. And as it relates to George Mason Square, I think really turning that into an attractive, welcoming place that creates a large 64,000 square foot pedestrian zone in the heart of our downtown. That's something that's entirely unique, that could be unique to Falls Church, along with all the streetscape and transportation improvements that this project represents. We can go to the next slide. And I'm just going to sort of breeze through some of these things. These are the specific requests, which we've talked about before that Ms. Ruzzi had mentioned. And we can go to the next slide. The constituent elements of the proposed development are hopefully well known by now. It's the repositioning of George Mason Square, the facade enhancements, the revamping of the plaza area, 150 South Washington Street, maintaining that, new thermal efficient windows, and new ground level retail experience for that building. The mixed use building, which includes the 109,000 square feet of new commercial plus the 246 multifamily units, and then the conversion of the city center park into a 10,000 square foot new park. These elements all sort of work together to sort of produce will hopefully be a very successful project. We can go to the next slide, please. I'll just breeze through these. These are the transportation commitments, which, when you have a project that is almost an entire city block, you are surrounded on four sides by roads. The transportation commitments are substantial because there's a lot of opportunity, but there's also a lot of responsibility. And so we are looking to enhance the bicycle infrastructure, the pedestrian infrastructure on the site, but also have a project that works from a vehicular perspective as well and can connect the entire downtown because this is sort of a linchpin property. We can go to skip the next one and we'll go to the one after that. We've talked about the proposed city center park. Going through the boards and commissions process, which we'll talk about in just a second. It's been quite remarkable to hear the input that people have had. We are continuing to meet with city staff, and we will continue to work with council and frankly anyone that's interested about what the programmatic elements of this need to be. We have committed to maintaining the park for a minimum of 5 years because we know that there are concerns about the ability for the city to maintain any type of new parkland. And so, once we get through with the programmatic elements, we'll be in a much better position to understand how much that will cost Atlantic to do. But it behooves Atlantic to obviously have an attractive park that is across the street from it that's well maintained. But we're continuing to work through the details of that. You can go to the next slide. We've talked about our open space calculations, it's sort of shown here. public open space, landscape open space, private open space, tree canopy coverage. In all facets of this, we do exceed not only the city's requirements, but next to the Pearson Square project, which Atlantic also developed, and the Spectrum project, we are sort of right in line with both of those. And then, all the other mixed-use development projects are in the single digits for everything. They drop off precipitously. So we're very proud of what we've been able to do, especially for a project that is the downtown of Falls Church. We can go to the next slide, please. We've talked about our stormwater concept. Pete Crawford is here from Urban Engineering. But again, just to, from an environmental perspective, everything pretty much sheet flows off the site today. There's very little stormwater runoff. And there have been issues with stormwater in this area. So we are proud to address that. It is being treated as though it was a pre-development site. It'll be brought up in terms of quantity and quality in terms of the city and the state regulations. And then on top of that, we are doing an additional 20% reduction. You can see the last bullet point to the rate of runoff for the redevelopment portion of the site. So we're trying to take in more than just our site and sort of offer that. We can go to the next slide, please. LEED Gold certification. Kathy Lawson is our lead expert. She is happy to answer any questions about what we're doing. We had very good back and forth with the Environmental Sustainability Council. They posed some subsequent questions, which we provided answers to last week as well. But excited about the prospects of LEED Gold on this. We think it's important. If we can go to the next slide. So the boards and commissions process, for the past 2 months, and many of you all have been in these meetings, but we have been on a veritable traveling circuit to visit with them. Each board, each commission has its own stated purpose, its own mission. Each has its own thoughts and desires about what should be prioritized in a project of this nature. And I'll say, as involved as a process as this has been, we are genuinely thankful for the feedback we received. It's educated us. We're continuing to receive that feedback, as Ms. Ruzzi had mentioned. And I will say too, and I mean this sincerely, but sort of given international events, I think it's very uplifting to see a strong and informed citizenry participate in this boards and commissions process, and the interest in the principles and the procedures of democratic governance at the local level, which is really the level that's closest to the people, especially in a city that's 2.2 square miles. It's been remarkable. And it now falls to us and the staff and council and everyone to sort of receive and synthesize those comments as the project continues to move forward through the process. And this, of course, led to many changes to our voluntary concessions, which were summarized in the memo we provided last week. And we also made changes and revisions to architecture, which we'll present tonight. If we can go to the next slide. These are the revised voluntary concessions, sort of a summation of them, and we can just skip through a lot of these. Let's go to the next slide, please. We can continue to go through. Next slide, please. And next slide. Next slide again. Oh, and these, yeah, and Commissioner Stevens, on the last slide, those are the additional sustainability measures that we had talked about, but we're happy to go through those. And we can go through the next slide. So the architectural changes, just to, sort of reiterate our architectural approach, again, we are surrounded, by 4 streets, so everybody sees it no matter which direction you're looking. So we've been challenged to have 4-sided architecture. At the same time, we need to have loading, trash pickup. It has to go somewhere. Parking has to go somewhere. And we've talked about this at length, but trying to have sort of an organic approach to architecture with contrasting but a consistent architectural dialogue between sides. We wanted to have all of our rooftop equipment and mechanical units not be visible from the street level. And that was something that was very important for Atlantic in particular. When you're standing at across from the Christian Science Reading Room by Zoya's and you're looking at the Harris Teeter building, you can see the HVAC units on the top. That will not be the case here. We want to have substantial sidewalk and streetscape elements around the site, which we're providing. We are reducing the amount of curb cuts from 10 to 5. We have consolidated all of the parking and the loading for all 3 projects. This project, George Mason Square Complex, and 150 South Washington Street, as well as the public parking that's being provided to the city at no charge. We're happy to walk through this evening, if you like, the shared parking analysis, how those numbers were derived. Maria Lashinger is here with Grove Slade, and she can talk about that methodology. But I'd like to turn it over now to Thomas Dennini, from Davis Carter Scott, our project architect, just to talk about some of the changes that we've been working through, kind of give you a direction as to where we're headed. Obviously, there's still a lot of discussion, but I think that you'll see that we've been looking at ways to break down the facade, using making things more friendly, using different color palettes, and that sort of thing, and setbacks. So, Thomas, do you want to? We can go to the next slide, and if you want to sort of walk through what we've got, and just turn it over to you.
Sure. Thank you very much, Andrew. Appreciate it. So we've received numerous comments and suggestions, which we have taken to heart and actually made quite a significant change to the architecture. So here we see a previous drawing of facade 3D image of the South Washington Street of essentially the garage building. The next slide that we see is what the proposed changes are. So as you can see, the building massing has been reduced. The size of the screen area for signage and marketing has been reduced in size as well. The top floor has been moved back. The corners have been, 20 foot of the corners of the building have been taken out, so that in the next image, you can see how as it turns the corner, you can see it's the building is steps back, so it's not as prominent as it used to be. That was right in front. So on this image, again, you can see what we're doing to the first two floors of the existing building. But on the left corner, you can see the previous design of that building. And then the next slide, you can see those are the changes you can see. So you can see the building moved back 20-some feet from the facade of the building, especially the top floor, and we carved the ends of it. So again, reducing the mass of the building and create something a little bit more interesting than and not so in your face, I guess. That might be the best way to, as someone described it before. So may we go to the next slide, please? So again, this is the existing view as you come down the road of the buildings as there are today. As you can see, the main curved facade wall that is in between the buildings, creating a barrier. So on the next slide, you can then see the updated perspective of what we're planning to do. So here it is, the latest perspective with all the different changes. And again, you can see the garage, how we have diminished the size of it, the scale of it, and all that. So, and as we continue to turn on the next slide, so on this image right here, again, this is the previous design that we had on the facade, especially on the residential side, on the balconies and that. So on the next slide, you can see the changes that we have made, especially on this facade, and then you can also start to see on the right-hand side. Here we go. So we have substantially taken the building and carved it. We were able to work with the units and be able to change the location of some of the units so that I can then create these recesses further back on the facade of the building to create, I guess, some of the comments that were given to us. And as you can then start to see on the right-hand side, the other residential face of the building, it's also starting to show the balconies. So if we may go to the next slide.
Thomas, is it still on the prior
Yeah.
slide?
Yeah, it's still it's showing the image is lagging for some reason. There we go. So here is the latest image of the corner showing the main entrance to the grocery. As you can see on the left and on the right, we have made a lot of changes to the facade, to the balconies, the ins and outs on that building. So it's pretty much carved much more than it used to be. And again, on the right-hand side corner, hidden a little bit by the trees, you can see the new facade of the residential, of the other leg of the residential, that should then be seen now, I would believe, in the next slide that is coming up. So here is where we were. This was actually a pretty interesting comment from the architectural board that was made specifically on that corner. So we took and then started changing this, and you can see on the next slide the changes that we made to the building. Here we go. So we reduced some of the in the middle of the image, the large balconies were a little bit too large. We reduced them somewhat, added some more balconies in the facade of the building, recessed it, and then in the middle, you can see we carved the building, recessed the right-hand corner somewhat, about 15 feet or so, changed the materials so they're a little bit more compatible to the rest of the buildings and the rest of the, because that was, again, another comment. So we introduced a little bit more of the darker brick and the red brick. And then on the next slide that we can see, we actually created a facade showing the loading dock. Here we go. So as we know, the loading dock is somewhat inside the site, right? As we go into the site, it is further into the site. But this is a facade that shows how the loading dock will be essentially designed. As you can see, there'll be doors. You will not see trucks. You will not see any trash or anything like that. Everything will be hidden. And then above that, because the first few floors is a garage, as you will know. And then above that, you got a residential. So you can see how we're introducing a little bit more of the balconies. And right above the garage, we add in some more trees, created a nice little plaza up there. Again, we're playing with the materials, the colors, to help to engage a little bit more of a same tone throughout the buildings. Next slide, please.
So I think that pretty much concludes our presentation. I don't know, Thomas, did you have anything else that you wanted to add?
There was some images that we sent you on the WNERF that I talked about how we were introducing some of these garage doors.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know why I didn't make it in the presentation, but
yeah. So again, we found some imagery that could help to make those. But besides, those are the major changes that you can see we did through around the building. So.
Well, thank you, Thomas. So there's some of the images of the WNERF, the drive aisle.
There were some images to show it exactly how, because there was a comment about how would the stores work, how is it going to relate to the sidewalk. So we went out and got some stock image of how some of these facades, essentially, think about a garage door, right? Would slide up and recess into the building, so the whole restaurant is open to the sidewalk.
I have those images. Yeah, I do see those images. Anyway, okay. I'll also, if I can share my screen, I could probably do it, but I'm not sure that that staff wants to do that, just from a recording perspective.
So, we can send those images.
Sure.
But that's kind of, the walk around the building with the major changes.
So, with that, Mr. Chairman, I guess, just to conclude, we really do appreciate everyone's, input on this. The boards and commissions process has been, very involved, and we appreciate the commission's attention to this as well. It's a big project, and we're very excited about the direction it's headed. So our entire team is here to answer any questions, and we appreciate your time and consideration.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for that presentation. Okay. Well, I guess we'll open it up to commissioners for any questions, comments for the applicant project. Start this off here. Stevens will start us off. Go ahead.
I guess I can go ahead and get it started. I'm sure there'll be a lot of other good comments. I went back and reread the downtown small area plan over the last couple of days. It's a long document, but there's a lot of good information in there. And that's the thing that really needs to drive us, I think, in terms of kind of a conclusion we reach on this project. I am in agreement that it will add a lot of new development in an area that's very much in the need of it. It will improve walkability considerably versus what exists there today. It will add substantial new economic activity, very important to a city that has to mainly support on its own shoulders a school system and police department and a number of other departments. So economic activity is critical to the city's sustainability as a jurisdiction. And my conclusion was that it does fulfill many of the small area plan objectives. Clearly, it's not, as Mr. Painter said, it's not going to satisfy everybody in all respects. It's a very dense project with architecture that is perhaps described as being somewhat on the utilitarian side. For me, at least, it reflects that it is a for-profit building. It's designed to, it's being financed by private capital, and it's designed to make a profit. So, it's not going to look like the Greek Parthenon. There are a few things that I would add into whatever motion we come up with. Well, first of all, just as an aside, I would encourage staff to continue to look at the south facade for the parking garage. Couldn't quite see all of that to see whether or not it's adequately hidden. So that's something I would encourage staff to do. And then there's three things I would add to our motion, and I can come up with wording when and if it's needed. First of all, is to ask the developer to add conduit for the purpose of adding future electric vehicle charging stations. We do have the 5% on the existing stations, and that is commendable. But we know from experience that if things develop as we expect, that we're going to want to see additional charging stations added, and that need not be a major effort if conduit, which is relatively inexpensive, is added. I wouldn't specify how much. I think it's the knowledge of the developer, I think, weighs in on this. Second, I think the developer should commit to installing all electric appliances for the residential units. I thought we had that, but then when I looked at some of the responses to the ESC, it seemed like there was some potential taking back of that commitment, and I may have just misread that. But every expert that I've read indicates that what's called beneficial electrification is the way that building is going, and that's both for achieving a healthier indoor environment as well as reducing greenhouse gas emissions as the grid electricity moves towards renewable energy. And then finally, as I've mentioned before, I think the developer should specify plans for coordinating the delivery of commercial spaces with residential leasing. I think it's more than just a merchandising plan, but basically what I think we want to see is, to avoid the situation we have at Founders Row 1, where we see a lot of boarded up commercial spaces for a very extended period of time as residential leasing gains momentum. So some coordination there, I think, is something that we should specify. So with those indications, I'm prepared to vote for this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. Ms. Teets, I think you are next.
Yes. So, it's funny. I don't think you might be surprised coming into this. I'm not super pro this project, but I do very much appreciate the architectural changes, because one of my real feelings about it is that because of the massing and the scale, that was going to kind of look odd in our downtown, because even the Harris Theater Building and Broad and Washington had a lot of setbacks. They had a lot of things at their corners. And so I'm really happy to see these changes. I do have a couple of questions. I guess it looks like the screen, the metal screen signage thing that you guys have at the corner, like a George Mason Square. Is that a different material now, a different color? Because it looks, I think before it was black and now it's blue. Does that mean it's going to be, is this what it's going to look like? Because it kind of toned it down from being, that black didn't look that great to me. The blue's a little bit better. And then the, when you're looking at the end of the Warnoff Street, and I guess that's the parking deck back there. Can we understand that material back there more? Is that, I mean, because it always looked like fake greenery to me, and I just wanted to talk about that one more time. I'm still not totally happy with the green space and the open hard space. I think a lot of those little nicks and crannies that you're showing are not really someplace that you're going to spend a lot of time. I think you're going to see a lot of people in this building going across the street and spending their time on the plaza Broad and Washington put in, or going to Big Chimneys Park, or perhaps going to the park that's across the circle. Although as that park looks now, there's not a lot of amenities over there. It's just like a green space with some benches. So I think there's no, like, I wondered if that park could have a little bit of play features to it of some sort back from the street. Because one of the things that up at West End that they were talking about is that they were going to have like functional play art along their main area. And I wonder, like, there could be something a little bit more fun on that corner park. If that, because that really de facto is the only really green space coming out of this. Because you guys are using the street, but that kind of exists there now, hardscape. You know, that entrance to the garage, hardscape. You're using the little, you know, the area in George Mason Square, but you know, that is dark back there. It's dark all the time, and having more buildings around it is probably just going to make it darker. So, you know, I'd like to see like something more interactive in that corner park across the way. You know, even if it's just some fun art of some sort that kids could sit on or something. But it just doesn't seem like a really fun space. It just seems like maybe, I don't know. I just wonder, like, who's going to go sit over there? I think they're really going to go over to Broad and Washington Plaza, or they're going to go to Big Chimneys. And so that just puts more pressure on Big Chimneys. I agree with everything that Tim is talking about in the motion. I think all of those things are very, very important. I did also have a question about the housing. I think the housing committee suggested they did not like the unit mix they were going to get. And I wonder if that has been applied, because they were saying that they just, you know, they really just wanted certain types of units, studios and 2 bedrooms. They don't want anything kind of in the middle because it doesn't really help them. So I think that's something that needs to be looked at. Shoot, I had something else in my notes, but I don't think I can find it now. So I'll just stop now, but and if I figure out what else I had, I'll get back to you.
Mr. Chairman, do you want me to respond to a couple of the
Sure.
questions?
Yeah,
So
go
I'll
ahead.
go kind of in reverse order. So the housing committee, the way that those numbers were derived was there's the baseline 6% of affordable units, and those need to be proportional to the unit mix overall in the project, which they are. And then for the additional 4.16% of units, housing staff, we met with Ms. Lewis and with the city manager. You know, we said what would be the right mix, and they were the ones that came up with, you know, we really need, you know, studios, and we need 3 bedrooms. So, you know, we have no 3 bedrooms program in this building, so studios is the way to go. And so that's how we arrived at the unit mix for the affordable. In terms of the city center park programming, I don't think that there's been one thing that's galvanized more opinion than what should be in this particular park throughout this process. I mean, it makes sense, right? I mean, it's. I will say that this is the largest. I believe it's the largest single space to yet be proposed. You know, to be conveyed to the city of any of the mixed-use redevelopment projects. And even if it wasn't being conveyed, it'd still be the largest single contiguous space of any of these projects. It is a part of this property. It deserves to be counted as part of the green space. We are continuing to receive comments about what that space should be. We will be meeting with staff next week, Department of Public Works staff and Recreation and Park staff, to continue, working on that. And then, of course, council's going to be weighing in on it as well. You know, it's got to be something that Atlantic, you know, wants to build across from its project, but it's also got to be something that will satisfy the programmatic needs of the city. And I think if you take a look at, you know, it might be sort of back of house right now, but with the city's established plans for this part of the, you know, of downtown, the idea is that there will be redevelopment on all four legs of this intersection eventually. And at that point in time, you know, then the true value of this green space will hopefully be known. I will defer to the architect as far as the greenery and the metal mesh, but my understanding is that the greenery that is above the LED screen would be high quality artificial greenery. There would be reasons as to why it would not be, you know, real greenery just from a maintenance perspective.
And I can recognize that. I would just say that I would prefer some other material than artificial greenery. I just don't, artificial greenery doesn't age well. It tends to be made out of plastic. I just don't want to buy more plastic and put it on the side of a building. So if there's any architectural feature left that I don't like the most, other than I still think the height of the buildings are a little too high, it's that if we're putting plastic back there, please think about something else. Just pretty much anyway. And also, I found in my notes the other thing. You know, one of the things I was thinking about with all of this is you guys are refreshing in the outside of George Mason Square, but I don't know if anyone here has been inside the building much. Inside, it's just, it really is not an attractive building inside. The lobbies are not attractive. I would actually like to add to the motion a condition that within the next 5 years that they do a refresh inside George Mason Square as well, because it's a big part of this project. And I think that it's going to have these buildings around it that I hope are very attractive inside, and it just makes their buildings inside look even worse. And so that was my other thing.
You know, and as far as the metal mesh, I don't know, Thomas, if you want to talk about it. I believe the color is gray. I don't know if it came across as blue, but I believe it's gray. Thomas?
It's always hard to tell in a PDF.
Right.
Yeah, it is hard, especially on the rendering with the shadows and everything, all the colors and everything, but it's not supposed to be black. It's supposed to be in the slate gray, grayish color. So yes, we have reduced made it a little bit lighter, but we don't want to make it too light because then it will become overpowering.
Right. Well, I definitely think the lighter color works better. I think the black looked kind of strange with the lighter brick behind it. And so now it seems, it's a little bit, it's definitely more attractive. Get rid of their plastic wall, please. That's all I'm asking now.
All right. We will bring you some samples of what we're trying to do. And it's not plastic, something new that is in the market, but we'll show you and we'll be more than happy to look at it. So.
Because right now it really does look like a artificial turf stuck to the wall. So I'd love to see the materials. Thank you.
Sure. And just to comment on one thing, I didn't realize my screen was not on. But the with respect to the interior of George Mason Square, so certainly at the ground level and probably, you know, maybe the first 2 floors. I mean, but definitely at the ground level, when we're turning those areas inside out, there will be substantial interior renovations as that project sort of builds out. The upper levels, though, are, you know, they would be redone as tenants move in and out of the building or with deferred maintenance. But, you know, Atlantic, I don't think, is in a position to do full renovations of George Mason Square for the interior side of it within the next 5 years.
I understand. Anything they could do would be nice, because I think that, you know, when it was built, it was probably class A or B, but it's kind of in that class C or D kind of in the interiors, a lot of them. And I know someone who moved in there a few years ago had to do extensive work to make it actually meet code. So in some places, it's not meeting code any longer. So anyway, just something to consider. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I think Ms. Weiss was next.
Yes, thanks. My first comment is a question, and I apologize for asking this at this stage, but who will own and manage this property after it's developed?
So this will be Atlantic Realty. This is a long-term hold for them, and they like being here.
Okay, that's terrific. I mean, I would think that long-term ownership would really undergird the need to install the EV conduit. I mean, if we're looking at market demand of like 50% of vehicles sold in 10 years will be EVs, I would strongly encourage the long-term owner of this property to look to the future. And so I strongly support Mr. Stevens' comments there. Also, with respect to electrification, let's not think about today. Let's think about the life of this building, and getting, electric utilities or electric appliances installed up front will, I think, support the long-term viability of this building, which is what we all want. I'd also like to align myself with comments in support of a more active park, and would recommend continued strong community engagement in terms of the design of that, so that we all get a park that really enhances the entire downtown and makes this a successful development overall. But my bigger comment, I guess, was, or another question, and this is a repeat of something that I had asked, I think, at our January work session. I'm just noticing that the Housing Commission wanted more 2-bedroom apartments. And you were commenting that the affordable housing units match the unit mix in the building itself, the market rate. If you look at our comprehensive plan housing chapter, it very clearly states that there's a real shortage of family housing, and that one of the city's most needed home types is large rental apartments. And this is a comment not just for the applicant, but for the city as well. I'm reading directly from the comprehensive plan housing chapter. The city needs more 2-bedroom rental homes and is severely underserved in 3-bedroom rental homes. The city does not have any 3-bedroom rental ADU units, making it virtually impossible for low to moderate income large families to live in the city. This is a comprehensive plan that we as a city approved. And at the same time, I think there has been this sustained negative reaction to the fiscal impact of Pearson Square. And I think as a city, we've overreacted to that. And I think we need to think about what we've agreed to strategically as a city and apply those values going forward. So I would like to, ask the applicant whether you ever considered 3 bedrooms at market rate or a higher mix of 2 bedrooms. And I'd also like to strongly suggest that for us to meet our strategic objectives, we need more market rate 2 and 3 bedroom homes in the city. And the more we have market rate large units, that's going to allow for a larger mix of those affordable, larger family friendly units. So I guess just to underline that, my strong suggestion with respect to approving this project would be a recommendation to City Council that City Council strongly, explore a higher mix of larger family units, including adding some 3 bedrooms in. But maybe the question for the applicant is, what is your perspective on the market demand for market rate larger units, 2 bedroom and 3 bedroom?
No, thank you for that, and I will defer to my client on this. So we have 22% of the units are 2 bedrooms, and 7% of them are 2 bedrooms with den. So that's actually a pretty high percentage when you compare it to other mixed-use projects in that are metro proximate or even not metro proximate. We looked at, and I know Atlantic did several internal studies at the lease rates of the mixed-use development projects and the apartments that are in Falls Church, all of which are above 89% occupancy rates right now, which is very high. And it shows that there is a strong demand, and that's not surprising at all. We were trying to hit the studios and the 1 bedrooms in particular. We think that there's a strong need for that, and that's also what housing staff has told us, especially with regards to the studios. But I think you're right too. I mean, a lot of the projects up until really this year have focused on reducing pupil generation wherever possible. There is now a shift in the city to look at housing affordability, and I think overreaction is probably the right phrase, especially now since the school's capital needs have largely caught up with demand, and there also seems to be a slight decrease in pupil generation in the city, going forward. But that said, we do believe that all types of housing are needed, and we were trying to hit that, hit a broad mix between studios, 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms. But Adam, I don't know if you want to speak to any of the studies you all did or anything like that, but that was kind of our approach on this.
And Andrew, I agree with a lot of what you said, but at the same point, I do understand the desire for larger units. What we have seen, not just in Falls Church, but in a lot of the surrounding areas, that with the cost of whether it's a rental apartment or for sale condominium, for that matter, larger units are really becoming a challenge in this area. And what we're seeing is that a much greater demand, especially for what I'll call the people on opposite ends of this age spectrum, maybe for younger people and more of your seniors, are really looking for studios and 1 bedrooms, because number one, it's easier for them to maintain, and two, from a cost perspective, it's also easy from an affordability standpoint. With that said, we did try to get in what I would consider a higher percentage of 2 bedrooms and dens than I think you might see in a typical comparable product out there. It is something that we can continue to look at. We've been talking about this project for some time, and the mix was headed in one particular direction because of the school generation impact. But I would say that was only one factor of it. It's also what we're seeing as what market demand goes. So I don't know if I'm really answering your question, but I know you're saying let's have more larger units. But at the same time, I think we do have a larger percentage of larger units than I think a lot of other people are putting up right now. But it is something that I'm willing to go back and take a look at to see how things are today. Is that fair? Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, I think Ms. Comont was next.
Sure. Sorry. I just want to compliment Ms. Weiss on her comments. I very much agree, and I'm glad to hear the applicant is open to taking a look at this. That's really great to hear. So I had a few other things that I wanted to ask about. There was another. I support all of Mr. Stevens's great suggestions for the recommendations from the ESC to include, and there was one other recommendation that they had, and I was curious if you all had considered it, and that was to provide composting for the tenants. I don't know if you're aware, but the city has a pretty robust composting service. We work with a compost crew, many bins out all over the single-family home neighborhoods. It would be terrific to make that available, more easily available to residents of our multi-residential buildings as well. So is that something that you considered or that you would consider doing?
To be honest, it's something that we have to look into further. I'm not in any way opposed to it. I think it's not something that we, or I would say a lot of other projects have, but that does not mean it's not a viable solution by any means. It's something that we do have to look into further. And as a side note, for whatever it's worth, my daughter's actually in charge of that at her university. So it is something that I have a little bit of inside assistance as we look through it, and it is something that we'll take it to further to see what we can get.
Great. Yeah, you all could really be leaders in this area. Yeah. I think, show other buildings how to do it. It sounds like you have some great advice on hand.
And it's just because we haven't done it before, and just because I'm not seeing it elsewhere does not mean it's something that means we're opposed to it. It just means that I have to get a little bit more knowledge on it, and it is something that we'll look into.
And that's a genuine promise to look into, because when we received those comments, yesterday or the day before, I immediately forwarded it out to everybody on our team to start looking at. And that one comment, that was the only thing in the email, was the composting. So
yeah, I think it would be a great idea. Sorry, my son is getting home. Actually, can you come back to me in a minute? Sorry. Thanks, Brent. Sorry.
Sure, no problem. Mr. Hira, I guess that means you are up.
All right. Well, let me start by just saying I really appreciate the discussion. all the changes that have been made from the last time we saw this. It just shows that the applicant has really taken to heart a lot of the comments that have come from many different constituencies in the city. And I also want to say I appreciate all my commissioners and their deep thought on this project. And I think we're really helping to shape a project that is really important to our city. I mean, it's a very prominent corner. I think the applicant has put forward something that's, again, very ambitious, with just, within the context of the commercial environment. And, most people would say the residential is the stable part. Well, but interest rates are going up, and we might have worldwide conflict that really affects our overall economy. So who knows where this is going? But at the same time, I love seeing an ambitious project that I think will really bring a lot of economic vitality and social vitality, quite frankly, to an area of our city that there's just a lot of activity happening. One thing I just wanted to ask, Ms. Weiss asked the question about, whether Atlantic would be the owner over a long period of time and manage the project. Maybe we should have already known that. But I have a question that I don't know the answer to, and it's just, what's the overall development costs for this entire project? I don't know if we've ever gotten that. Or at least I don't know. The total development costs. What are we looking at? 250, 300 million?
It depends actually what you're including, whether you're including the existing George Mason Square, you're including 150 South Washington, but the
whole thing, everything.
I would say it's in you're almost pushing $200 million.
200 million. Okay. All right. Yeah, that's not fair. I figured it might be higher. But I just wanted to, because that just helps us, when we think about the proffers and to know the total development costs, and then we can sort of get that number and then sort of figure out what percent are we getting in proffers for various things. So 200 million, let's say.
And again,
helpful.
that's including basically everything that we have in that block. And I'd say depending on because two of those buildings aren't really part of this submission. So I'm just estimating off the top of my head how you put that in. Your ballpark. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, that's all right. It's helpful. All right. So now my other question is just, last time this came before us, I had some questions about the affordable housing and the affordable housing mix. It seems the Housing Commission has some preferences on, how many one bedrooms, and Ms. Weiss talked about, hoping to see that maybe we could get larger bedroom size, get up to 3-bedroom for the market rate, and maybe replicate a 3-bedroom on the ADU side, which would be fantastic. This is something we really need, but I also understand at this late stage in the game to change the development plan and to put in these different bedroom configurations could potentially be very difficult. But I totally agree with Ms. Weiss that our developments going forward, we need to encourage the development community to come forward with projects that have some 3-bedrooms. And Adam, you kind of said that the market, it might be more difficult because there might be a little bit more demand from the seniors and the students for smaller bedroom units, but I got to believe that there is demand for the 3-bedroom units in the entire DMV because it doesn't happen very often. But I also know the 3-bedroom units are expensive. And then when you think you're trying to make it an ADU unit, you're really the delta between what you can get on the market rate and the subsidized. That's a big cost. So if we get a 3-bedroom, we might really be reducing the number of units we get in the ADUs in this building or elsewhere. But it is important that we push for it. So anyway, Ms. Weiss, thank you for bringing that up. It is something we've said that we want to see in our city. But I want to go back to, again, when you came in last time, I asked about Virginia Village and whether there would be a discussion. Adam, you said you would go back to the city. I also saw that, there in the staff write-up, there is something about, there was a conversation. And could you just give us a little bit more detail about the conversation about Virginia Village, the units that Atlantic owns there, and where the city is, and what you're thinking about in terms of potential planning for doing development there or having somehow the units be part of what's happening here in another part of the city. So anyway, I just want to hear where the conversation went.
Well, I think I would be I'm a little bit awkward position in stating what the city's goals are or the city's objectives are. But I would say that my impression from the way that the conversation ended, and odd to go to the end of the conversation, was that I think we should. I would say the city just said that I think we should keep things the way they are, and let's see how things develop. I would say that that was the general conclusion and the impression that I got. Yes, there was a discussion about the Virginia Village and this particular development being separate projects, but I think that there was also a notion that the city was not exactly certain in which direction Virginia Village was going to take, and it was probably not appropriate to advance any further conversations at this time. That was my take. Andrew, if you had a different take on it, please.
No, I mean, we met with them just to learn a little bit more about what the city had accomplished over the past year and a half as far as purchasing the units. We talked about that the 3 units that Atlantic owns are stabilized assets. They're well maintained. There's no health issues. We talked about the rents that Atlantic has been charging over the past several years and how that compares to what the rents are that the city charges. And then we also talked about that Atlantic is interested in maintaining this market affordable on a going forward basis, and that if we ever thought about entertaining notions about redevelopment or anything like that we would be happy to discuss those options with the city. That was my recollection.
And I would say at the same time, at any point in time, if the city wants to sit down and have further conversations about that, I'm always willing to sit down at the table. There's no objection to that in any way, shape, or form. This has been, they have been 3 separate buildings that we have owned for a number of years. And we have had good relationships with other groups in renting those units out. And I think it's been a very positive and well-received mini project, if you will, for the community. There's nothing formal or official about it, but I think it has served a big need in the community, and we don't have any plans to change that for now.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I appreciate kind of hearing your perspective on and where the conversation went, and just the fact that you had the conversation. I definitely appreciate that. But I would say that within the development proffers here on the affordable housing, it's in the material that we received. There still is the opportunity for a cash in lieu payment that could come from the applicant, as opposed to having the units in the building. And I guess what I would propose as an amendment is that we specify that if money is to come into the housing trust fund from this development, because we're not taking as many ADU units in the building, that we preference those dollars to go towards Virginia Village. And the reason I say that is that this development is a major development. We're talking, potentially an additional $200 million. And we know it's on the site now. And we just looked at what you're proposing, which is great. But that is likely to put development pressures and rising rents on the folks that are in Virginia Village. So if we are talking about equitable development, we're talking about doing development to increase the economic pie. And then when we increase the economic pie, we redistribute it to our low and moderate income folks who are in our community. So I do feel that sort of tying the funds, or at least preferencing the funds if we get cash from you guys, that we do look to put it into Virginia Village to preserve the affordable housing. So I would recommend that we put a preference on the in lieu cash if we are to receive that. And so that's the recommendation that I would make. I would love to hear what my fellow commissioners think of that. But I think really tying development that we're doing to preserving affordable housing, and especially affordable housing that is in very close proximity to this development is an equitable thing to do.
Commissioner Hyra, if I can respond, I mean, Adam, I don't know if you thought about that at all.
Well, to be honest, if I'm understanding what you're saying, I think that would be city policy and city preference. It's not. Am I understanding it correctly that how the city decided that they wanted to proceed with their affordable units? If that's the way that they wanted it directed, I don't have any objection if I'm understanding you correctly. But that wouldn't be. You know, we would still be providing the same dollars. It's just that you're saying this is the way that I recommend.
I might suggest that we could agree to that. I think obviously it's going to be up to council and to the city attorney to determine whether or not that's a voluntary concession they're willing to accept. But I do think that at least to send a clear signal to council, it might be good to include that recommendation in the resolution as well, even if the applicant agrees to do this. Because who knows what's going to happen once we get to council, but to memorialize it in the form of the resolution, I think would also be beneficial. So that even if for some reason they say, well, we don't want to be handcuffed long term about the use of those dollars, at least there's something in the record that shows what the commission thought about it at the time.
Yeah, let me just, could I just explain a little bit? I see other hands flying up, which is great. I guess I've said something, maybe that's not controversial, but at least people have an opinion on, and that's great. But one of the things that's quite clear to me, and I'm sure is clear to the applicant and to my fellow commissioners and to other people on the call, is that we are interested in increasing and bolstering our affordable housing infrastructure for the city. I think there's unanimity on that, but there are different opinions on how to do it. The problem can be our city has very little focus. We have a goal, but we often don't know how to execute and implement that goal. And what I'm trying to do is to help us with a focus. So of course there are going to be people in the city that do not want this on, but you know what? We are part of the city. It's not the city staff. We are commissioners who are appointed by our city council to help make recommendations. So we are making a recommendation potentially as a planning commission to focus our affordable housing dollars. And I think what I'm recommending, makes a lot of sense because we are stimulating development. We're giving you a bonus density and we're doing a lot of things as a city to facilitate this development, which is great, but it will put pressure on nearby low-income housing. So I would like to tie what the development we're doing here to a parcel that is not too far away where we have low income. And that I think will help shape our city's affordable housing policy and give us a goal to focus on. Again, I know hands went up, so I'm sure people have different opinions on this, and which is great. But I have a viewpoint, and that's my viewpoint.
Sure, and we can discuss that. I think when it comes time to make a motion on this, we can discuss the various recommendations that I've been trying to keep a tally of that, and I'm sure folks know what they've said. So when it comes time to do that shortly, we'll talk about that and see what makes sense and what fits within the framework of what can be done in voluntary concessions, etc. But okay, I mean, a bunch of hands just flew up. Right now, I know Mr. Snyder, your hand came up. I mean, did you want to respond from the staff perspective on that question?
If it's okay, I may be able to add some helpful information. The South Washington Street small area plan does have a lot of information about the Virginia Village, and the city's goals for that area are articulated in that. There has been in the last few months, private property owners have offered properties for sale, and the EDA and the city council have been able to purchase 4 additional units to the one they already own, which is next to the ones that Atlantic owns. So there is a longer range effort to have a plan for that area. existing affordable housing, whether it's Merrill House or the Fields or Virginia Village, are all areas that the city has interest in. And so I think city council, if money was to go into a fund, would want to have the flexibility to target it at the place where it would do the most good, and that could change from time to time. I would be happy to do more briefings, and I see Cindy Metzger on the call as well about the ongoing effort at Virginia Village. But if you haven't had a chance to read it, go look at the South Washington Street Small Area Plan, which does kind of have an outline as to preservation and possible redevelopment of Virginia Village with the goal of creating more open space and affordable housing. I would say about Atlantic's properties, as we've met with them, learned the rents have stayed very, very stable. There have been no code problems with it. Those three, along with the one that we already owned, have been among the most stable of the quads. We're opportunistically trying to purchase them as we can as they become available, because smaller property owners are divesting themselves of some of these properties. And so, Cindy, you may have other things you want to mention, but I thought I'd just give that background, and refer you all to the small area plan, and also to let you know about what the EDA has been doing along with City Council in a very proactive manner. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schneider. All right, let's see, Mr. Fuentes, I think you were next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thanks to my fellow commissioners, as always, great comments, especially the last discussion on affordable housing. As I said before, I do like this project a lot, most of it. I think that, I do like the commitment to the office and the retail. I agree with the staff report that the height is not disproportionate, and as I noted last time, I do like the cityness of it. I really think it's a great addition to the city, especially compared to a lot of the other stuff we've been building. And that's a bit of the dichotomy that I have with this project. I think it is undermined by the parking. And I know folks get tired of me talking about it. There's so much parking with this project. At a time that, as we talked about before, we've seen demand for driving decreasing. As we continue to develop this way, we're going to see less and less demand for parking. I was really hoping that you'd come back. I thought that the boards and commissions and others were clear that they thought it was too much. I was able to go through some of the parking materials in the packets that hadn't been updated since last June, but there's all kinds of confusing pieces in there. I mean, the math is tough to understand. The third bullet in the technical memo says that the proposed supply exceeds the demand. That same document says you didn't even consider, or the consultant didn't consider, other modes of transportation to get there, and the multimodal aspect. And so, assuming everybody's just going to drive, and it doesn't even consider folks who are going to patronize more than one use. So it's the absolute maximum that could possibly be needed on this site. I think that's actually called the anticipated maximum demand. Just feel like there's going to be so much excess parking in this space. And again, I know you talked a lot about the what you feel like the market needs, but it's not an abstract concern, right? I mean, there is costs that go into the project. You have to pay for all the spaces you build. We've talked about a lot of different things. I feel like there's at least a portion of that money. If we didn't have so much parking, we could use it for other things that the things that we say we want. So, again, it may be too late for all this, but we've got some issues with the way that we calculate and think about parking in the city. There's complete disconnect between the things we say we want, the things that we trumpet, the things that we're proud of, and then the things that we're approving like this. So I just want to get that on the record, because I know the next developer will say, well, the last thing we did was like this. So, I just want to get that on the record for everything else going forward. Related, though, I think, and I'm sorry if this is coming in too late. I'm curious if you're thinking about unbundling any of the residential units with parking. When we think about the affordability of the housing, the units would be more affordable if people didn't have to pay for parking they don't need. And given all the things we've talked about, all the things that the developer has trumpeted here, the proximity to transit, walkability, et cetera, I think there's a lot of folks who may not need to pay for parking that's not there, or that they don't. So that's one thing. I will also look at this Hawk signals piece in the VCs, and again, maybe coming too late, but there's a note in the VCs that says that if you try to put in both the traffic signal and the Hawk crossing and it doesn't get in for whatever reason, either the VDOT's not being cooperative about it, that there's no further obligation for the developer to put anything in. And I get it. It makes sense. I mean, I can see VDOT being concerned about throughput and level of service and all the traditional things VDOT cares about. But the challenge is that it doesn't address then the problem that the signals are trying to solve in the first place, right? And your traffic analysis is very helpful and talks about the safety concerns and a lot of the incidents that have occurred over the last few years. If those things don't go in, those problems don't go away, right? In fact, you'd probably argue that they get worse. So I'd like to see if there's some way that we can not just do away with the idea, but either use money to do other improvements or something else. And I get that you don't want to be cornered into building a bridge or a tunnel or something that you don't want, but again, the problem is well stated, and I think we should figure out ways to address those issues. And it's not crazy. It's exactly what you say you do under VC number 24 about the bus shelter. You say if you can't build the bus shelter, then the money will go to elsewhere in the city. I'd like to see that with those two VCs for the Hawk signal and the traffic signal. The last thing then is on the EV chargers, and I apologize, this may be a question more for Tim. I think Tim knows this stuff more than anybody, but I know there's differences now between proprietary chargers that Tesla and others would put in and others that are designed to be more universal. I don't know if it's worth it, and maybe the commissioners could weigh in, if we should stipulate that we prefer, I think, more universal chargers or a Chevy Volt or something, as opposed to something that Tesla would put in, which is very proprietary just for those vehicles themselves. So again, sorry for the long set of comments. I just want to get some of that stuff on record for the next time we talk about these. Thank you.
And Mr. Chairman, may I respond to a couple things that were raised?
Yeah, go ahead.
So the Hawk signal, yeah, I mean, we obviously want that Hawk signal. We've actually received some pushback in boards and commissions about whether it makes sense, whether it's going to slow up traffic. Personally speaking, I could care less about, I mean, that sounds horrible, but I really think that we need to take back the downtown for the pedestrian in particular. But that's just Andrew speaking, not, but I know that Atlantic also has every interest in wanting that signal to be constructed, pedestrian actuated signal. But you're right. I mean, if VDOT or the city, if it doesn't work or anything like that, we can't build it. So the proffer or the voluntary concession is trying to draw a conclusion to it. Hadn't thought about in the drafting of it the same language that we have for the bus shelter. Happy to look at that though, and I think it's a good catch, and we'll take a look at that. I will say that the Hawk signal though, based on, and I have to recognize Maria Lashinger with Grove Slade, based on our traffic analysis, shows that it will not have a deleterious effect on traffic because it will obviously be timed with Maple and Washington Street. As far as the unbundling of residential units with the parking, Adam, I don't know if we talked about that. If it's if the rents are going to be inclusive of the parking, or whether or not if anybody wants to have a parking space, it's there, and we need to have enough parking in case everybody in fact wants to have a car. But Adam, I don't know if you want to speak to that, or you thought that far ahead as far as that issue.
So what we've done based on our shared parking analysis is that we have allocated dedicated parking specifically for the number of units that we have. And when I say that we have, I believe it's one space per unit. Some people are not going to necessarily want parking, and some people might want more than one space. In addition to that, then there's overflow based on the shared parking that we have with the office and the retail. So it's not necessarily fixed that someone in apartment 301 is going to have this particular parking space. It's going to be somewhat controllable on how we're allocating parking based on what individuals' demands are. And that's why we've put the parking at the number that it is. I would say in a different set of circumstances, there would be a larger count than one space per unit. I think the market will show you that even today, there is usually a demand for more than one space per unit.
So, and then Maria, I don't know if you can talk to the parking reduction. We came in, the zoning code requires almost 1,100 spaces, and we came in with a parking reduction request of over 11%. We then increased that and lopped off the floor of parking to 20.4%. So we're trying to fine tune it, but at the same time not incentivize single occupancy trips, emanating from the site. We have our transportation management program as well. But Maria, can you speak to how those numbers are? Like, how lean is this? How close are we to in one sense meeting market, but on the other hand, not overbuilding parking?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you. I think there's a couple of points to address there. Starting with, I guess, how we come up with the proposal, what that supply ends up wanting to be at the end of the day. It's definitely a multi-step process. Obviously starting with the zoning ordinance requirement, as Andrew mentioned, it's right around 1,100 is what, if we just said we're going to do exactly what code says, it's at 1,100. The next step then is we take a look at the surrounding areas. Where are we? Can we take reductions for mode split? Are people going to be walking, driving, utilizing that TDM program? So the answer there is yes. So out of the gates, we went ahead and we reduced the zoning ordinance rates. So that's the base rates that you'll see in that parking study. Actually revised since June 2021. So those are lower rates than what the zoning ordinance requires. We then take a secondary reduction, and that's the shared parking reduction. So the shared parking is actually applied to the reduced rates to give us that further reduction, where really what we're trying to hone in on is based on the development totals. What is the anticipated demand, right? At the end of the day, because we are in an urban location, because some people will not be driving there, really where does that demand end up? And so with the current parking supply, 875 spaces, our current demand is just under that, about 2% less than what our parking supply is going to end up being. Our maximum demand, right? We're looking at the time of day utilization over the course of 24 hours. We're looking at each of the individual uses and how do those shake out, knowing that we're not going to provide 100% of each individual use, but who's really going to be using them over the course of the day. And again, the goal is to, as best we can, balance the supply and demand. And that 875 is right about, that is the sweet spot that we were able to come up with, again, after reducing the zoning ordinance rates and then applying shared parking. And I think there was a comment on a statement in the parking reduction study, and it is in there, that does not include reductions for multimodal users or those who are anticipated to use more than one use. That's actually the statement there, and we can clarify it in this next go round, is that we didn't apply then a third level of reduction to assume that once we've gone ahead and applied shared parking, that we could then further reduce. That had already been taken into account. So we'll clarify that statement. So thank you for pointing that out.
But so why wouldn't you do that? Why wouldn't you put another level of analysis on it and reduce the amount of parking you have to pay for?
I mean, really,
space. It just seems like it's a lot of money.
I mean, really, it was really in that first level, by reducing the initial rates out of the gates. That initial rate reduction was for your mode split, non-auto users.
I just want to say one thing about parking. I don't want to build parking. It is just not something that I'm a fan of. It's not that I have an over burdening desire that I want to go out and build as much parking. It's very expensive to build. It's obviously been something that has been discussed an awful lot over the past year within the cities particularly, and we have done a lot of work on trying to figure out how we can reduce it the best way possible. Maria will tell you, we've had a lot of calls on how we can do this and still meet demand. Office tenants, particularly retailers, grocers, are very particular about how much parking is being provided, and the same thing is going to be true with our residents. So it's not something that I will say that the numbers that we're at right now, that even when we're having discussions with prospective tenants here, the comments that we're getting back are your parking numbers are low. And I know that's not the general perception here. And I do think that part of the issue and part of the concern here is that we're not just parking one city center, we're actually parking 2 existing buildings on top of that. So it is a ton of parking that is being built. There's no question. it's just that there's such demand and we're being pulled in so many directions here that I don't know how we reduce it further. That's really where we are. It's not kind of something that I just want to build in excess of it. It's just not the case.
And Adam, to pick up on another point, one of the things that we were looking at as well as what does the city have planned for this entire area and how large are the parcels around it. For example, in the block that's behind Dogwood Tavern, where the city actually owns Mr. Brown's Park and the parking lot back there. If you look at the comprehensive plan in the small area, downtown small area plan for that block, it was just taking away all of that parking, but keeping it relatively low density, similar to what it's there today, but maybe adding in a couple floors here and there, but nothing on the order of the magnitude of what's shown across the street. In order to redevelop that block or have any type of green area, but in the interior of that block, for example, we were talking with another, another case. The question was, well, how are we going to park it? And the answer was, well, you've got the Kaiser block, Kaiser deck across the street. Hopefully inside will have some space in their garage with public parking. But then the Atlantic project, if parking utilization proves to be less than what we anticipate it's going to be, that could be an opportunity to allow the redevelopment of those blocks so that those blocks don't have to provide their required parking on their site because they simply can't. So this is the one area, if you look at the downtown small area plan, you look back at the comprehensive plan, this is an area that's always been planned to have a parking garage, but a parking garage that's able to satisfy multiple needs, not just this particular project, but the downtown generally. So, even if demand doesn't appear to be as great as we think it's going to be 10 years down the road, or 15 years down the road, we might be able to have much more efficient development on other parcels and being able to use this parking garage, if that makes sense.
It makes sense. With all due respect, I firmly disagree with it. And I disagree with the comments that we're not incentivizing single occupant driving, providing a whole lot of free parking, very centrally located, is absolutely going to incentivize driving. There's just no way about it. And I just think we're missing a real opportunity here. That's all with the cityness of it. And just one last thing on the unbundling. It's less about it's related, but it's also related to the comment on affordable housing. It's one way to make the units more affordable if folks didn't have to pay for parking they don't need. That's the focus of that. Thank you.
Let's see. I think. Thank you, Mr. Puentes. I think we'll circle back to Ms. Comont, who got cut off.
I'm ready. It's a lot quieter here now. Sorry, and I'll be brief. Mr. Puentes asked a lot about what I was wondering about with the parking. I'm also concerned that we're still over parking this. I was wondering specifically, what are the number of spaces for each use? So it sounds like if you have one-ish space per residential unit, you have maybe 246 units for the residential. How does the office and retail break down?
So, Maria, you can probably, well, I know you can speak more intelligently on this than I can. But with that said, because there's shared parking uses, the amount of spaces that are allocated is going to fluctuate based on the time of day and actually the day of the week. So what I was referring to is more of dedicated parking spaces that we are going to have specifically for the residential units. During different times of the day and during different peak periods, there will be more residential units, more residential spaces that are being parked than the one per unit. And at other times there, would be less office. So it's actually a balance between if it's noon or if it's, midnight. And that really goes into the shared parking area. So it's not as easy as to say, do we have the typical 3.0 per office or 1.5 per residential unit. But Maria can get into as much detail on this as you want, and she'd love to talk about it.
No, I understand. Yeah, so it sounds like it's 600-ish maybe for a mix of office and commercial, 246 for, I may be misinterpreting it. I guess the point I want to make is that the office has changed in America and around the world. People, I'm still working from home. Eventually in May, we'll be back 2 days a week. So I don't know if you all have done any studies of the existing utilization of the parking for the George Mason Square offices and how many people are actually parking there now. I think that would be useful information to have if you haven't done that. And I don't know that we can assume that whatever ratio or calculation that you've made in the past to calculate office parking will hold in the future. I think it's going to be wildly more than we need. And so it breaks my heart, honestly, that we're building a freestanding parking garage in the heart of our downtown. It just does not seem like the highest and best use of that land. And I would much prefer this parking be underground and you all have a nice other big, beautiful building there. That would be a better thing for the city, for sure, at least from my perspective. So yeah, I do still have concerns about the parking. I think that the unit, it should absolutely be unbundled from the units for all the reasons that Mr. Puentes stated. So yeah, I do still have some concerns about this. I was curious if you've done any of those studies of the existing usage of the parking.
And let me make sure I'm off you. We've done, and we constantly are doing studies, not just on these buildings, but on other buildings that we have in our portfolio. We own, a little over 4 million square feet in the suburban Virginia and Maryland area. So we are constantly looking at that. To say that it is a changing office environment right now is a massive understatement, and it's changing in so many ways, and many of which have not even been seen yet. There's no specific guidance, though, or any specific results that would show me that parking has changed as a result of it. Yes, there are still a lot of tenants that might still have space and aren't fully in occupancy yet, so that is still having a factor today. But one thing that is a little bit different at George Mason Square and at 150 South Washington, and will be the case at One City Center as well when it's built, is that those are typically smaller tenants that are in there. We're not going to have too many 20 or 30,000 square foot tenants that are coming in there just based on the footprints. We have a lot of 3,000 to 5,000 square foot tenants, and we are seeing that those tend to come into occupancy through the pandemic a little bit quicker than others. But even in our discussions with them and based on the counts that we're seeing, the parking that they're requesting, or in other words, demanding based on their lease requirements and such, hasn't really changed much. And if anything, I would say a lot of those counts are higher than what we're talking about here. But it is something that's going to change. Can I tell you where the market's going to be in a few years? I wish I had that crystal ball, but we're trying to anticipate the best that we can. And I would say that if we were 5 years ago, I would tell you that we couldn't even build 875. We would be building a heck of a lot more than this. As that, you may not agree with it, but it's really the case. I talk to people today and tell them about how much parking we're talking about, and it's just not a historical number. It's really heading in the right direction.
All right, thank you. The other thing that I wanted to talk about was the screen plan. I actually was looking back through the materials and I noticed, I think in a letter that you all sent July 28th, it was a description of the revised materials. The last bullet there, or one on the first page, was restricted use of exterior LED screen to prohibit commercial advertisements flashing lights. And I was wondering, is that something that's changed since you made that previous commitment? Because I think the last time we talked and in the materials that you've shown, you have shown some advertising for your tenants. So I was curious about that because I was surprised to read that.
Yeah, the change that was made last year was with respect to off-site commercial tenants, not tenants within the project itself. And so, Ms. Ruzzi, I don't know if you want to talk to this at all. I mean, we had asked about this earlier, but everything that goes on that screen is going to have to be in accordance with the city's signage regulations and probably subject to a comprehensive sign plan as well. So it's very early right now to see what, exactly what the programmatic elements are going to be. We've tried to anticipate that it could be a variety of different things, advertising, for the tenants, cultural programming, art, ambient things, so we're still very early in the game, but obviously we have to meet all of the requirements that the city sets forth in the signage ordinance. So I don't know, Akita, if you want to speak to that at all, but or Paul.
I don't hear Akita. I just, the language in that was pretty broad. It was the prohibiting commercial advertisements. Advertisements, maybe that was an error. It didn't say anything about being off-site. And my personal preference would be not to be having advertisements there. So I think it would be better for it to be, as you described, maybe historical photography, ambient imagery. It could be used for events, but I'm not a fan of the idea of having commercials playing on a large screen in that area. I'm sure we may disagree on that.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Happy to look at that again. But I do think, for the project, I mean, it's not constant, blaring out of things, but it is important for the retailers in the project and for people to know where the retailers are and that sort of thing. Adam, I don't know if you want to speak to that at all, but we would not want to just have no commercial advertising. But again, I think
absolutely. I mean, we have a signage in our code. I mean, we don't have, and nothing in our code. I was looking at our code earlier today, and we have, we talk about like hot air balloons, but we don't talk about giant LED screens. So there's nothing in the code that would, say how this should be used for signage that's advertising things. So you're kind of like off the map a little bit with this, I think, and it needs to be something that I'm not anti-screen. I'm not anti-giant LED screen. It's fine. I just think we really need to have a very clear idea of how you're going to be using it, when it's going to be used, what is going to be shown there, how visible it is to the public, how loud it is. Like all of those things need to be nailed down. So that's all I'm really asking for. And I was just a little confused by the previous commitment to not showing advertising more broadly, or at least that was how it was phrased in that letter.
Yeah, the way that it reads is that the owner shall not use the digital screen for off-site commercial advertisements, and any commercial advertising shall be limited to tenants of the property only. I think during the site plan process or when we file for the comprehensive sign plan, we can have those discussions about what the parameters happen to be.
Sounds good.
Okay. Ms. Weiss, your hand is back up? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, just one last comment, but maybe as an introduction to where you'll take us next, Mr. Chair, which is I heard a few of my fellow commissioners say it may be too late for this. I think with respect to changing parking and maybe changing housing mix, unit mix, and something else. And if it is too late, we probably all have better uses for our time. So I guess I just kind of wanted to maybe put that to the chair and maybe Paul, Mr. Stoddard. Is it too late, or do we still have space to make some robust recommendations here? Because I think there's a lot of positive momentum and support for this project, but also a lot of, I think, pretty rigorous recommendations that we have for improvement as well. So is it too late, Mr. Chair?
No, listen, I think Ms. Weiss, you're hitting on some issues I think we've all had with the process. I mean, some of it is the process of how, this is back before us for action, but the applicant hasn't made a formal resubmission. They provided some insight and some, comments on where they're going, but, we have not seen, a resubmission, and that's kind of, one of the frustrating things I think we've had on other projects as well. In that it comes to us and then from council and then goes back to council, but we have a work session, then a hearing, but we're not expected to, the applicant's not expected to provide a new submission. I mean, that is a bigger picture discussion. I mean, I think the most we can do under the current, we have two things we can do. I mean, under the current framework, we can provide a whole list of recommendations to council. We can say we support this conditionally on X, Y, and Z condition, or we can defer and ask the applicant to respond again, or we can if we don't support the project, I think it then requires council to have a larger majority, a super majority when they hear the case. So, that's kind of how we fit into the process. So I would argue it's never too late until council votes on a project. It's never too late. But, obviously, that we've provided comments in a work session. And I think my recommendation would be to provide the council with our recommendations for them to incorporate as part of their deliberations with this applicant. I think that's really the most practical thing we can do, but I'm open to discussions with the commission about where the consensus is and what folks are looking to do. I think we've raised a number of issues. I think the applicant, to their credit, has had some provided some positive revisions, including on the architecture front. And I for one was pleased to see some of those changes. I haven't given my 2 cents yet, but again, I agree with a lot of what I've said, like the ADU mix, the unbundled parking. A number of issues that other folks have brought up. I support. So at this point, actually, before we kind of just dive into deliberating here, this was a public hearing. I think I know the answer to this, but this was a public hearing. Received a number of letters from other boards and commissions, but were there any members of the public or anyone who signed up to speak tonight, Mr. Stoddard or Mr. Garris? I don't think there were, but it is a public hearing. I will ask that question.
Yes, there was one speaker, Miss Emily Jenkins. Is she here?
Great. I'm glad I'm asking that question.
I am here. Thank you so much. It's wonderful to have the opportunity to speak. My name is Emily Jenkins. I'm here on behalf of the Falls Church Chamber of Commerce, and I'll be very brief because I will tell you it's been absolutely enlightening and wonderful to go through this hearing process and hear all this wonderful insight and thought that has gone into this project. But at this time, I just wanted to take the opportunity on behalf of the business community and say a huge thank you to Atlantic as well as the commission. The thought that's gone into this has been tremendous, and from the chamber's perspective, this is a phenomenal project that we hope will really help to center a lot of the walkability and business community of the city. A few things just to highlight that have already been discussed this evening. In particular, the chamber really views this as a gateway project. A lot of the signage that's been discussed tonight, we are hopeful to see the City of Falls Church really highlighted in the public facing corners of the project, hopefully with artwork that identifies it as being a prominent part of the city, that you're entering in the city. You've got the walkability, the businesses that are all right there. We want folks as they're coming into the city to know that they have entered the city. We'd love to see that artwork that highlights some of our, history and our prominent residents, signage, all of that, I think will really help to center this as a gateway to, what will become such a prominent business center of the city. And so look forward to seeing that continue to develop as the project proceeds. The ground floor retail space is also great from the chamber's perspective. We're excited to see how we can add this more innovative walkability space, but just wanted to really encourage the applicant here to, as we are going through the process, to make sure we are doing the necessary investigations to make sure we have the most pedestrian safe walkways, signage, and access to the existing businesses. As we want the folks to be walking, we want them to be patronizing the existing businesses, the new businesses that come in, but doing it in the safest possible way, and encouraging, in particular, with the traffic circle, that we are looking to make sure that we have appropriate, and I know some of this was discussed earlier, signals to make sure that pedestrians can access all of the different new and existing areas of the business. And then finally, just want to really highlight, as on behalf of the existing businesses in this area, as we are going through the construction process, we want to make sure that the existing businesses are taken care of with communication, relocation, and really strongly encourage the applicant, as we are proceeding forward with the application, to make sure that there is an ongoing regular communication with the existing businesses to ensure that they have a voice as traffic is ticking up with construction, to make sure that there is a way for the current businesses to have a voice with the applicant, so that the impact to the folks that are there, that we want to keep there, we want to keep happy before, during, and after construction, that they are able to sustain their business. And we remain here as a resource to make sure that they do have the support, but want to again encourage the applicant to keep that existing business in mind as we proceed forward with the project.
Great. Thank you. Okay. So I don't think there was anybody else who signed up to speak. We did, like I said, we did receive a number of letters from other boards and commissions, but I don't think of any other members of the public. So I guess I'll close the public comment portion of the meeting. And so circling back to the discussion that Ms. Weiss just raised, we're at the point now where we would deliberate here and decide what we want to do. We have a proposed motion from staff. Staff is recommending approval. Mr. Stoddard has raised his hand. Mr. Stoddard?
Yeah, I think the question was, is it sort of too late in the process to make recommendations on the project? And I think you're right, Chair, that you mentioned sort of until the council votes on it, it's not too late. I might say that until the building is actually constructed, it's not too late. This won't be, the special exception process, if it does get approved, is not the last step in the plan. That there is the special exception. If that's approved, it proceeds to site plan. If that's approved, it proceeds to building plan. So there are a number of stages where this project can still be reviewed and changes can still be made. And it's common to see changes happen at each of those steps. So no, I don't think it's too late. In terms of where this particular application is, it's where it's supposed to be under the review process that we're still piloting for SE projects, this one as well as the Founders Road 2. The intent was that they would make a second full submission prior to council referring it out. They did that. And then they've made interim submissions in response to council comments, in response to boards and commissions, in response to planning commission. And then the intent under that pilot project is that after the planning commission's recommendation and before going to council again, that they would make a full submission that includes all of their interim changes, any additional changes that they want to make. So I think this is actually a very good time to be making suggestions before they've made that third full submission. In terms of the options laid out, just a reminder that the request before the Planning Commission is to consider the two special exception applications. And so really the tests for those SE applications are laid out in the primary and secondary criteria in the SE code. And obviously there's a lengthy write-up on how the application stacks up against those criteria in the staff application. And we did land with a positive recommendation on those. But ultimately this is your recommendation. And I think if there are things that you all see that belong in the project, either because they're good policy, reflected in the comp plan, small area plans, other policies the council's adopted or set forward, or because you think it would better stack up against those criteria, I think you're right to call them out and either include them in your action or, I would just say include them in your action.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Stoddard. Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree with that assessment. So I've heard what everyone's had to say. I mean, we have a lot of comments. I mean, I think, although other projects that I think have had similar levels of concern at this stage of the process. And I think the best way to get started, if there's consensus for this, would be for someone to make a motion, and then we can begin to kind of incorporate the various recommendations that I mentioned. So I guess I'll open it up for any commissioners who are ready, willing, able to make a motion on this.
I can read. I'm happy to make a motion.
Okay.
All right. I move that whereas an application for a special exception Am I starting the right place? Yes. Whereas an application for a special exception to allow residential uses within a business district in a mixed-use development project and a special exception for a height bonus have been filed by Atlantic Realty Companies, Inc., the applicant, pursuant to Section 48-4882 in conformance with the procedure set forth in Section 48-90 of the City Code. And whereas at its regular meeting on December 13th, 2021, the council formally referred the special exception to the Planning Commission for its review and recommendation. And whereas the Planning Commission finds that the proposed project, as amended by the applicant's revised materials, is generally consistent with the city's comprehensive plan and West Broad Street Small Area Plan, and substantially achieves the goals of the comprehensive plan by providing a mixture of commercial uses with retail frontages along Maple Avenue, Broad, and South Washington Streets, parcel consolidation, and pedestrian-oriented design. And whereas the Planning Commission finds that the proposed project, as amended by the applicant's updated materials, largely satisfies the primary and secondary criteria in the zoning code for consideration of special exception applications, including conformance with the comprehensive plan and small area plan, new commercial space with a mix of commercial and residential uses, net new revenue to the city, and other community benefits. And whereas the process outlined in the zoning code for special exception and site plan allows for further refinement of specific project elements during the site plan. Now, therefore, I move that the Planning Commission recommend approval of TR 21-09 to City Council.
Okay, we have a motion, and do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, Mr. Puentes is second, did the motion. So let's see, now time for discussion. And so, Mr. Stevens, your hand is up. I guess that means you'd like to start off with some recommendations here.
I do. I have 3 additions. I'm open to suggestion on exactly where they could go, but I'll start off by just saying right at the very end, where it says, now therefore I move the Planning Commission recommend approval of TR 21-09 to City Council, and I would add the following.
Put the motion up on the screen.
Sorry? With the following additional recommendations. The developer should add conduit for the purpose of adding future electric vehicle charging stations. The developer should commit to installing all electric appliances for residential units. And the developer should specify plans for coordinating delivery of commercial spaces with residential leasing. I read those kind of fast, so I'm happy to.
Yeah,
Staff,
commissioners,
I mean,
not to
I'm-
jump in, but if it would be helpful, I mean, sort of the digital version of the whiteboard, we can actually, we can make an attempt anyway at typing those in as real time
Okay.
so that you all can see what's up on the screen for discussion.
Yeah, about to ask.
Yes,
you-
please.
Sure.
Yeah, Cameron, if you're able to zoom in, do you have the
And
web version up?
Paul, would you agree that the best place to add that is right at the very end?
Just for the structure of it, I might suggest that you add another section. I think you want it in the motion itself, so I think you would want a new line that reads, I further move that, and then I think you all could enumerate your recommendations.
Right, or we say, we move recommendation, recommend approval subject or conditioned on, the following recommendations or something to that effect.
Yeah, hold on a second. We're gonna have a slight technical glitch pulling it up on the.
That's a wordsmith too much, but Paul's doing that. But I mean, that's what I'm sort of hearing. I mean, and we can discuss this. I'm sort of hearing that folks, there seems to be,
Should be in the Word version.
but again, based on these changes, I mean, I think folks have raised a number of really important aspects of this that we would like to see find their way into the next submission to council.
One City Center.
And so I think that's really support from the commission is willing to we can recommend approval, but conditioned on this following list of recommended revisions to the project. So, all right. So Paul, you ready, or Cameron, or whoever's going to be?
Which line?
So jump down to the bottom and add a line that says, I further move that.
I think the chair was actually suggesting something slightly different.
Oh, I'm sorry.
The
we're-
planning committee.
Sorry,
Yeah, I
we're
guess
fixing
I was
technology. Go
suggesting-
ahead.
Okay, you were talking, internally. I think what I'm hearing from the commission is that we're at the point where we are ready to recommend approval, but conditioned on a number of revisions in the next submission. So, to council. So I think instead of a further move, I think we recommend approval to council conditioned on the following recommended revisions or recommended, however we want.
So they'd be changes in the line above, Cameron. So the line above, Brian, if you read it again, so you're saying that the planning commission recommend approval of.
Yeah,
to
that's our move.
council,
Recommend
conditioned
approval.
on-
City council, so at the end of that sentence, you can jump the cursor down to the end of that sentence. We recommend approval to council, conditioned on the following recommended revision.
Recommend approval in there, right?
Yeah, I mean, because the first sentence is we recommend approval, right? So, yeah, we don't need to say it again. Yep, they can get that. That's
We'll fix that.
Okay. Just let me know when you want me to start.
following recommended revisions or the following.
Yeah, let's go ahead and make it a numbered list.
Yeah. And then, right, and then go ahead, now you're up now.
Okay.
I said,
The developer should add conduit for the purpose of adding future EV charging stations. And number 2, the developer should commit to installing all electric appliances for the residential units. And 3, the developer should specify plans for coordinating delivery of commercial spaces with residential leasing. That's it. For me.
Procedurally, that should probably be made as a friendly amendment and then go back through the first and second process.
right. Well, maybe we should. Yeah, I guess we can do it one person at a time, but or we could just do it at the end.
As a collective amendment.
Right. I think that might just be easier than. But I assume that the maker of the motion. I guess that's fine. We can do a pause. I think that's fine. All right, the maker of the motion. Does the maker of the motion accept that amendment?
Yes.
Okay, good. And the seconder was. Forgetting who even seconded this.
Rob,
Mr.
Mr. Fuentes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Good. So that's that. Okay. I think Mr. Howard's hand is up next. So go ahead.
Yeah, I think this is great that we're doing this in this manner. But so anyway, you guys know that my preference would be that we add some guidance to the in lieu cash that may come from the ADU units. But I will just tell you that my thought was instead of having this in the motion, like where we're putting it now, and I would like advice from folks, but we have a voluntary concession, community benefits and terms and conditions, a document that lays out all the proffers. I would suggest we amend that because I think that
Well, you could.
it's maybe a better space to do it. It's really easy. At least for the thing that I'm interested in, I don't know if we can open that document. I have it open.
Well, we could list in here, Mr. Howard. We could, any changes to the VCs are also fair game. So if there are recommended changes to VCs that we want to, we could also list them in here. We can talk about physical changes to the plan. as well as like the VC's kind of right. That is the other piece of the package. The council will approve the actual plan, and they'll approve the voluntary concessions or accept them with that. So we can I think make those suggested edits is part of
Okay, park them up top.
Yeah.
All right, so let me just get because it's a very simple edit, but I need to get to the exact section of the VCs. Sorry, this is just going to take me a second to flip through this document, but I'm almost there. All right, so it's the affordable housing, it's 0.39. It's just that, all right, so 0.39 in the VC, I don't know, 39A.2, it just says cash in lieu payment, and it has all the cash in lieu payments, and then it just says any such cash in lieu contribution shall be deposited into the city's housing trust fund. And my recommendation is just that this cash in lieu payment, if it is to be made, would be preferenced for Virginia Village. So I don't exactly know how we state that up front.
Do you want to word, sorry to interject, do you want to word that as any cash in lieu payments accepted for affordable housing be preferenced for use in Virginia Village?
There you go. Thank you, Paul.
Mm-hmm.
I think, yeah, okay, so that's...
Sorry, it was any cash in lieu payments accepted for affordable housing be preferenced for use in Virginia Village.
For preserving, yeah, that's fine. Just, it's affordable housing money, so that's
for
fine.
preserving affordable housing, yeah.
And I'm generally okay with this, but I think maybe we should say something to the effect of, again, this is a recommendation, and this is something that, again, if it turns into a cash in lieu, we should reference the fact. I mean, everyone knows where it is, but it just say, reference the proximity to the project, just to kind of explain where this is coming from. I mean, I also, understand where Mr. Snyder's comments about. I mean, the council will do what they're going to do, but obviously we wouldn't want to. I'm not as well versed in the ins and outs of this as you are, Mr. Hira, but we wouldn't want to tie hands if at that time turned out there was another need that perhaps the money was better used for at the time. But I certainly understand the concern about the proximity of this project to or the Virginia Village to this project and what that could mean for the values in Virginia Village and the affordability there and all of that. So, I guess as long as we can, I mean, again, it's a recommendation, and ultimately the council will decide what they're going to do with this. But we should just, I think, reference the proximity is why we're calling out that particular development.
You could add a parent, so you could do, after Virginia Village, you could do comma, which is proximate to the application, comma.
Right.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, I think makes a lot of sense that we are saying that this is nearby. That's why it should be used in this location. But also, we are using the word preference as opposed to, must be used or has to be used. Like, we're not putting the really tight constraints. The whole idea, though, is to focus the development community and focus our city staff on particular localities. And I understand we don't want to tie people's hands, but at the same time, we need to provide some guardrails or at least some guidance, because when people just sort of say they're interested in so many different places, then we never actually execute on any particular place. So this at least gets us thinking that this development is tied to maybe taking out some of our affordable housing. So we should preference that money to a particular location, and hopefully it gives the city a little bit more of a focus. And I know that the city has been looking at this area. I know there's been a lot of work in thinking about Virginia Village, but we all know the city does not have enough money to truly preserve this entire area. So any more money that could go can only help execute on what the city has already been discussing for at least a year now.
You want to add a letter D to preference?
Say it again.
You want to add the letter D to the word preference in the second line?
Just talking to,
Oh, yeah, okay.
Okay. All right. Well, I think worded that way. I mean, I'm comfortable with that. Is the maker of the motion okay with that?
Yes, I guess my only suggestion, and I wouldn't fall on my sword on this at all, but I'm just, there are certain specific things that we want to change about the development. And then this is an impact of the development and a recommendation to council to consider that, impact. So I almost wonder if that is, rather than, recommend approval conditioned on, it almost feels like it needs its own sort of standalone, I further move that city council, be mindful of the effect or something like that, and consider preferencing, cash in lieu payments. So that's my only thinking that it.
Or we could break out. I mean, this is specifically talking about one of the voluntary concessions, which again, I do. I view the voluntary concessions as, again, they're kind of the other half of the other piece of the puzzle. When council approves a project, and so we could list if there's more than one. If there are any other recommended changes to the VCs, I mean, these could be called out separately. Otherwise,
I guess my only question is that a change to the VC? Because I think to the applicant, and I just want to say I'm supportive, right? But the applicant's point was, we're going to give you the money, and it's up to the city to decide how to use it. So I don't know if that is a VC amendment or a recommendation to city council and staff of how they should use that money.
That's a good point. Yeah, I'm okay. All right, we can call it out separately. It can be a further move. All right, so maybe that should be like a further move. I understand where you're coming from.
Mechanically, I think a lot of these things would already be captured in the VC, so it might be. As a staff member, I would think it would be easier for me to handle if it was all in one motion and they were all just listed out.
Well, let's keep it easy then.
All right. All right. So is that your only recommendation, Mr. Howard?
We need to get the seconder to accept the amendment.
Oh, yeah. Mr. Puentes, do you, as the seconder, accept that addition?
Yes.
Okay, good. So, all right. Any other recommendations to add to the list here? Commissioner Coleman, go ahead.
Thanks. I wrote my 4 out, so hopefully this will be quick. The developer should provide composting to tenants.
I was telling Paul when we spoke about that issue, a few days ago. I feel like there must be apartment buildings somewhere that are doing that, but it obviously would need some thought when you're going to have like multifamily concentrating a large quantity of compost, to avoid the, negative externalities of a large pile of compost.
It's probably more frequent pickups, I would think.
Right. Just the way that's stored and where it's collected and exactly. So, yeah, it's really something to look into. There's got to be some building somewhere that has, tried this or is doing it. And it certainly is a worthy endeavor. And just minimizing food waste in general. Not to get off on a whole tangent on food waste, but believe it or not, the use of good garbage disposals that can actually grind up food waste, also keeps it out of the landfill. And believe it or not, is a good alternative sometimes. So I don't know if, but again, we don't have to go down that rabbit hole right now, but I'm fine. I'm personally fine having that in there as a recommendation. That some of the developer can look into it. Okay, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but go ahead, Judy.
Oh, that's okay. Does Ms. Weiss need to approve them one by one?
Well, let's do your whole list first, and then.
Okay. I guess maybe you can help me with the wording here, but the developer should describe specifically how the LED screen will be used and ensure any commercial advertising complies with city code.
I think we should say, I agree with you 100%. I was actually going to bring that up. That was the one item that no one mentioned. You did, and I was going to mention the LED sign. I think we should say that, and I don't know, again, the best place for it to be. It could be in the voluntary concessions, because isn't that where, I think right now that's where it's referred to. But I think we should recommend that there be more specific restrictions or on the use of the LED screen. More specific guidelines, restrictions. I mean, guidelines are really not strict, I guess. So maybe restrictions is the right word, but so there should be more specific. Yeah, I think the restrictions is fine if everyone else does on the use of the LED screen. And I know just to also, Mr. Stoddard and I were chatting about this particular issue. The closest parallel to this anywhere nearby is probably the LED screen in Mosaic. That's not as visible from the right of way. It's internal to development, but I will tell you, I was not personally involved in that project at the county, but there was a lot of thought and put into some of the restrictions on the use of that. There was a lot of concern about the brightness and what it could do to. There's a lot of, because there are many apartments that look right on to that square. There's a lot of concern about everything. So I think the one thing that we have to be careful with is, like any sign, is being careful about being prescriptive about limiting content, what they can show, like favoring one type of speech over another. There have been some notable Supreme Court cases on how you can regulate, how a local government can regulate any type of speech, and signage is speech. But I think as long as the restrictions are based on boat rate of change and motion, brightness, not allowing maybe off. And I think the VCs already do prohibit off-site advertising, billboard, advertising things that are off-site. But I think that's something I guess we should certainly recommend council look at, maybe in consultation with the city attorney, to make sure that any restrictions that would be imposed are proper. But I totally agree that there could be some limits on. Just also not to create a distraction. I mean, another very valid issue is that because it is visible from the right of way, people driving by to crane their neck around and they see a bright flash, and that could be a hazard. I know actually VDOT has certain standards related to that as well. So Route 7, I think, is VDOT's jurisdiction. So anyway,
this works for me. That language is fine. I think it's fine for it to be broader. We want to have a discussion about the LED screen. Basically.
I agree. I think the VCs need to be tightened up on that front, and so I agree.
Yeah, I drafted 2 on the parking, but I wanted to defer to Mr. Puentes on those. If you've already drafted your versions, please go ahead. Do you want me to do it, or do you got it? Okay, good.
I can if you like.
Please do.
Mr. Chair, should I just take
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
The developer should pursue further reductions in parking consistent with the city's comprehensive plan strategy to meet increased travel demand via non-automobile modes.
Could you repeat that one more time?
Right. Further reductions to decrease travel demand via non-automobile modes. That's right from the comp plan.
And there's a portion between the two. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it was further reduction. Can you read it again, Mr. Puentes?
Yep, sorry. Developer should pursue further reductions in parking consistent with the city's comprehensive plan strategy, et cetera, et cetera.
instead of parking demand strategy, comprehensive plan strategy, right next to where you are. Yep. Cameron, you are, I think, the only one brave enough to try and do this in real time, so I appreciate your efforts. It's hard enough typing in front of one person.
I appreciate the patience with watching me type.
Right, is there, and then did you have one additional item, Ms. Coman, or Mr. Martinez have another one?
I have two more, if that's all right.
Okay.
The developers should provide options to unbundle residential and commercial uses from parking.
And I'll just throw out that has been a common element of the city's applicants' transportation demand management plans, going back, I think, as far as the 301 West Broad. That's been a pretty typical thing that either applicants have done or property managers have realized is a good thing to do after the fact.
And then if it's all right, one more. Again, I'm not sure of the wording, but the city should amend VCs 21 and 22 so that if the owner is unable to secure approval for the mid-block crossing or traffic signal, then other options to improve safety should be pursued.
I might suggest replacing the word city with developer. The VCs are voluntary by their nature, so that generally the city isn't empowered to change the VC.
Very good, thank you.
I missed a block there. What was after 21, 22?
Sorry. 22, so that, I'm sorry, if the owner is unable to secure approval for the mid-block crossing.
Thank you.
Or traffic signal.
Enable, right.
Perfect. Thank you.
I just had one more that Ms. Weiss talked about, but I don't think she recommended it. But Corey, you can tell me if this language captures the spirit of what you commented on. But it would be the developer should seek to incorporate 3-bedroom units.
I actually have a slightly modified version of that.
Okay. Go ahead.
That's all right. And I would say I was politely waiting for everybody else before I amended my motion. I don't know how you amend your own motion, but I guess what I would say is starting that sentence with, if we're okay procedurally, consistent with the city's comprehensive plan and the stated need for more large rental apartments.
So, city's need for what type of apartment?
For the city's, consistent with the city comprehensive plan's statement that the city's most needed home type is large rental apartments. That's directly from the comp plan.
I'm sorry.
Is large rental apartments, comma, delete. Just the next word after the comma should be the developer.
Oh.
Yeah. Should seek to incorporate. I was going to be a little more flexible and say should seek to incorporate a higher percentage of 2-bedroom or larger units. Having heard the comment on 3-bedroom, but I'm really kind of open. Mr. Hara, if you feel strongly about specifying 3-bedroom.
Strange.
Oh, you're in a box.
I can,
You could cut off the whereas clauses to give yourself some more space.
I can make a new box.
Shrink.
Just temporarily. Nope, not there.
Box in a box. Speaking of procedure, we're coming up on 10:30, Mr. Stauber.
I was watching that right up until 10:20, and then it slipped my mind. But yes, you do have 2 minutes to make a motion to extend the meeting.
We're not even done with this item, but I mean, we can talk about it. We may have to punt the other item, the work session. I just don't think we have the wherewithal but we can talk about it. But I mean, we may have to punt that. So.
Of 2-bedroom or larger units, yeah. Units. Oh yeah, units. Yeah, that's fine. And I guess the other comment I would make, I don't know if any other, Ms. Teets hasn't added anything yet, but I guess just sort of stepping back and thinking about how we order these things, there are certain recommendations that once the building is built, you can't change it, right? Like if you don't get the conduits, I mean, you can, but it'll be super expensive. So I wonder if the commissioners would be willing to prioritize or order some of the sort of built environment pieces. So like EV parking, which we have up in the top. It's EV, anything related to the parking garage and the unit mix, I think. And there might be other things as well, but I would just bump those higher up to the list. So I guess what I would suggest is that item 7 should be bumped up and turned into item 3, I think.
These aren't necessarily in order of priority. I mean,
Not in order of priority. It's just like I personally would, try to give some sort of preference or emphasis on the items that are much harder to undo after the fact. Like I don't know anything about composting, but my guess is if we don't get it now, there's a way to do it after the building's built. That's just what I'm thinking. So.
I agree. I think the order, while it's not a specific order, people tend to look at the stuff at the top first.
Okay.
You can definitely put composting at the bottom. And the sign. I'm sure the sign will be discussed.
Unless you need a separate compost chute to be installed.
That would be right.
Except
Yeah.
Anyway.
And then item 10, the units, I think should also go up in the top, maybe number 4. And I'm sorry if I'm missing something else that is really can't be undone easily after construction, but.
So it's 10:31. We technically need a motion to continue onwards.
So I move that the Plan Commission continue the meeting past 10:30.
Second.
All right, do we have an expiration date or are we just going indefinitely? Or expiration time, rather?
I didn't give one because I don't know how long the CIP is going to take.
But we can discuss that. I don't know if we're going to have time for the CIP, but we can discuss that. And let's say 30 minutes from now. And that's your.
I'd say 45 because we still have 15 minutes here. Let's
all right.
do 3 minutes to tie it up. So I will amend my motion to say, I move that we extend the Plan Commission meeting past 10:30 to 11:15 at the latest.
All right, I'll second that. We need a roll call vote.
This is why we need to be in person when we can just say aye.
Mr. Krasner?
Yes.
Mr. Stevens?
Yes.
Ms. Dietz?
Yes.
Mr. Fuentes?
Yes.
Ms. Weiss?
Yes.
Ms. Comont?
Yes.
Mr. Hyra?
Yes.
Okay, we are good to keep on going.
I think if I was going to add anything to this list, I might add that the materials used on the parking deck within the inside of the courtyard where the Festival Street is, and also on the outside, be very clear. Because at this current, like just based on the drawings, it doesn't look adequate. You can definitely tell it's a parking deck on the outside. Especially on the outside portion. That's kind of, I guess, facing Annandale.
Just to clarify, you're saying that those facades need additional attention to reduce their appearance as a parking garage?
Correct, and that there needs to be more clarity on what it looks like.
Oh, sure. More clarity on what the finished.
Yeah, what the material, because seriously, on the inside portion of the end of the winter, if it does look like plastic green things. So I don't think that's what we want. And on the outside, on the back, I think it still looks like a deck. So I just wondered, like, I'd like to see what those materials look like. Well, I mean, at this point, that's past it for us. But I think the Planning Commission should make sure that they're very clear on what those facades look like, both inside and out, and what the materials are.
Yeah, Cameron, I think it's finalized design and materials.
Yeah, that makes sense. Design and materials. I just want it in there because I really do want I hope that the council really does look at that again. And they can go at 11. It's not like super important, but it's just something that's still, I think, I've seen in a lot of comments from the public.
Okay. All right. First of all, just to circle back, does the maker of the motion and the seconder, except we made several additional changes since we last checked in with them on that. The maker of the motion, the seconder, is everyone still good with these changes?
Yes.
Mr. Puente? Okay. All right, so we're up to a list of 11 here. Is there anyone else or anything else you would like to add to the list here? It's a pretty comprehensive list, actually. Looking at my notes, seems like everyone who had additional things they wanted to see has expressed that.
I think on number 10, it just says VCs 21 and 22. Just add the word "so that."
So that if, right. So that if. That's correct. Yeah, that's right, Tim. Good catch. And if staff finds any, grammatical errors and stuff here, I know they clean it up to make us look like we can speak English. They try. All right. Okay, so unless there is anything else, then a pretty good list. Very good list, actually. We got the maker of the motion is okay with the amendment, and the seconder was okay. So I guess this is the last call for any discussion on our motion. I would just for posterity, I'll say that, the project has come a long way. I think this list in this discussion tonight shows that still got a little ways to go. It does have the potential to be a transformational project for the core of downtown, and for that reason, I think it's just that much more important that it achieve as much as it can to really fulfill the vision of the comprehensive plan and that the city has for this crucial part, this crucial block. So with that, I will ask for a roll call vote on the amended motion. Mr. Garris.
Chair Krasner?
Yes.
Mr. Stevens?
Yes.
Ms. Teets?
Yes.
Mr. Puentes?
Yes.
Ms. Weiss?
Yes.
Ms. Comont?
Yes.
Mr. Hyra?
Yes.
Okay, well that passes, and thank you to the applicant team, Mr. Painter and Mr. Shulman and the whole team, everyone who's been involved in the project. We appreciate your time and effort working with us and with the other boards and commissions, and we look forward to seeing this continue to evolve at City Council and looking at your next full submission and watching the project continue to progress. And things go well, we'll be back with us for a site plan at some point in the future. So good luck, and thank you again for working with us on this.
Thank you all for.
And thank you very much. We very much appreciate all the comments and all the time that has been spent. It's been very insightful, and I just want to say thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right. Well, okay. So commissioners, we have a decision to make here. I mean, it's 10:40. We have a couple of, obviously, you know, we did the minutes. We did some commissioners' reports. You know, that stuff is simple. We have the CIP work session, you know, which in many years takes us, you know, my experience takes us an hour to 2 hours in and of itself. Now, it may not be the case this year. I mean, I guess the question I have, and this maybe Mr. Stoddard can help here. I know, you know, we had talked about the idea of compressing this even before tonight. We ultimately didn't do that, but we talked about the idea of compressing it into one night of, you know, discussion and recommendation without a separate work session. But we ultimately decided to do the work session. I know Ms. Cindy's here and she's been patient and waited with us all the way through this 3 hours of meeting. But we'll tell you that, you know, it's 10:40. I'm sure we're all a little tired. I mean, we can certainly plot ahead and go through the work session. I would say, you know, I know Ms. Messer's prepared a presentation. You know, hopefully it's a brief presentation, and then we can. I think the more valuable part of the item is always the discussion anyway. So I don't know. I guess I'm looking at before we start to take the temperature of the commissioners. I don't know, Mr. Stoddard. There's not much room in the calendar to, you know, move this around, which is also the problem I know that we had.
Yeah. If I could, the timing section lays out that this is really, and we did poll the commissioners. There was an interest in holding the work session tonight, even knowing the materials maybe have a later distribution than usual. But I think the presentation to, and Ms. Messer, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the presentation to council is on the 28th of this month. Is that right? And so your meeting, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say that is correct, and of course we need to go final and produce it the week prior. So, but I appreciate and understand the late night and the impact on brain cells. So I am glad to try to do it all on the 16th. I'm glad to try to do a quick synopsis tonight, sort of whatever the commissioner's pleasure is.
What I might throw out there is that looking at the commission's agenda, the 16th, I just looked at it again, and if I read it right, the CIP is the only item you all have scheduled for the 16th. But what I might suggest is that you all receive the presentation that's been prepared, so that you have the benefit of that tonight to guide you as you read the materials that have been distributed. And if there are specific questions or big questions, small questions, whatever they are, if you can raise them tonight, then that would give staff time to prepare and get them to you in advance of the meeting on the 16th.
I appreciate that, Mr. Stoddard, but I have a feeling like, you know, once we start diving into it, you know, I don't know, there's no way we can do that quickly. I think we either do the whole thing on the 16th, you know, and just, you know, and since it is the only item, I think that, you know, will give us more than enough time to have the discussion. Because I think if we, you know, hear the presentation and then start asking questions, there's just no way. That's my view. I don't know if other commissioners have other, but I think, I don't know. I just, yeah. So my view is that I would prefer we do that, but if the majority of folks would rather just, you know, truck on, then so be it. So anyone else have any feelings about that?
I would agree. I would agree with you, Brent, that we do it all on the 16th, but I would suggest that maybe we can all review the materials now and send any questions that we have to Ms. Mester and Mr. Stoddard, so that they could have those, you know, well in advance of that meeting on the 16th. Would that work? I mean, not now at this very moment, but like sooner than, you know, sooner than we might otherwise.
Right, because we just got them today. I know Ms. Mester worked to try to get them to us.
Exactly.
You know, just received everything today, and so we didn't have much time to review it in advance either. So, yeah, I agree with that approach. I'm seeing nodding heads. I think Mr. Hira nodding. I think folks okay with that. Ms. Rice, okay with that approach?
I mean, I'll defer to Ms. Mester, I do feel bad that she hung out this entire time with us when we had it on the agenda. And I wonder if we could just maybe all commit to not asking questions and maybe take 5 to 10 minutes for the highlights.
Okay, I mean, yeah, we can do that.
I agree that too. I'd like to just a quick overview, even if we just go through, that one the snapshot, and just kind of do something like get an overview and a snapshot done.
Let's get the presentation. I do appreciate that Mr. stuck it out. Hopefully you're doing this from home, so as opposed to I think Paul's in City Hall. So, yeah, he still has to drive home. But yeah, maybe we'll hear the presentation, and then folks can table any questions for 16th. Does that work for everybody? All right. So let's go ahead, Cindy. I apologize for the getting a little punchy because it's late. But
Totally understood. Council didn't meet Mondays. You all are just replacing my Monday night meeting. And so maybe if Cameron could bring up the PowerPoint, I will sort of abbreviate the presentation because some of it you all are very familiar with. I do want to note sort of what you have posted today for your review before the 16th. Definitely, thank you, Cameron. Definitely appreciate any questions in advance by email. It will help us prepare it, but also on the 16th, glad. I'm hearing echo. Are you all hearing me okay?
That's better now.
Okay. So you'll have the slide deck that I'll go through quickly tonight is posted for you. You'll have a staff report that includes also the full snapshot, the budget guidance as part of the attachments. And then attachment 1 of that staff report is the CIP. So you'll see that it's posted by sections so that it's not a humongous PDF. So you can go to 01 for the overview, or you can go to 06 for facilities, 10 for utilities, for example. So you'll have a lot of attachments, but it's the full CIP that I used to normally give you in a hard copy notebook. If anybody does want the hard copy notebook, please let Mr. Starter know, and we'll be glad to produce that for you. So with that, if you could go ahead to the next slide, Cameron, for me. The PowerPoint covers these items here. I will go through them at a high level and then, of course, look forward to a deeper dive on the 16th. And as we go to the next slide, do want to highlight a lot of great accomplishments. I want to give kudos to a lot of staff who did a lot of good work during COVID while we were really short-staffed, and sometimes short-staffed because of COVID illnesses and quarantine. So don't want to go past that good work. This is just a sample, high school partnering with the schools, parks, and library, and so forth. And then next slide is the active project snapshot. That is in its entirety put in section 01 of your CIP. Here is just the excerpt. So we do have 28 active projects, although 2 just completed were on the punch-out list, like the library. But 19 are green, which means we're on schedule, on budget. 7 are yellow. Some of that is staff resources during this COVID period, and some of it is cost escalation, which I'll highlight. Pleased to say no red. And next slide. So the big picture of the CIP is $118 million. That's your general fund, your school fund, your transportation, and stormwater and sanitary sewer. That is an increase from last year, and a lot of that is due to actually the ARPA funding, which I'll talk about in a minute. But now that we have this federal funding, we've appropriated some in the current year. FY23 CIP is going to pick up a big chunk as well. As most of the commissioners know, these spreadsheets, which are hard to read on a slide, I realize, are in the CIP notebook that you'll get electronically. When it says tab 3, that means section 03 in your PDF. So all of these you'll be able to blow up and see. Next slide. So some of the key highlights, we have had cost escalations and we've had to capture that in FY23 CIP. A lot of them are for construction costs, both labor and materials. So you'll see that Fellows property construction went up. The new project, which is the community center, went up from the time staff proposed it to me till I put it in the CIP by $200,000. The fire station also, and then WMATA operating. So when we get to the projects, I'll highlight that a little more. We do have a fair amount of ARPA money that's going into reinvestment in the community. The city, as I'm sure you've been tracking with council actions and newspaper articles, has received $18 million in total. We've already allocated, for example, 7.4 to stormwater, 1.9 to affordable housing, which ties nicely into your earlier discussions. And I don't mind at all hearing the affordable housing discussion because that's very important to me in the city. And that 1.9 was specifically for acquisition at Virginia Village. And in the last under 12 months, we bought 4 additional buildings there to preserve them. But in this CIP, we're putting an additional $3.1 million of ARPA money in. It's federal. It makes it a little more expensive in fund procurement, but it's worth having the money for the parks, community center HVAC, and you'll see a food bank facility. I noted on that line $4 million state ARPA. We actually have in this pending state budget $4 additional million of ARPA money, but using the state's money for stormwater. And that is through council advocacy with Senator Saslow. So hopefully we'll make it through the budget. Right now, there's a lot of controversy over the Richmond budget, but we are in there. There are 2 new projects. That's the community center HVAC and then the Capital Food Bank. And you'll see 2 new projects also in the 10-year outlook. And that's for the Eastern Gateway down at 7 Corners. As part of that POA follow-up work, and then business improvements. Next. So we did continue the equity lens work that we started last year, and you were involved in developing that and reviewing it. So all projects continue to have the equity lens, and that it has been really affirming the work we're doing and the type of projects we're doing, and it also was consistent with the Capital Food Bank project that came in because that's for food to low-income disabled citizens. We also did add as the recommendation of the Planning Commission, the environmental impact lens. My appreciation to Kate Walker for helping us draft those questions, which she tested with some commissioners and environmental advocates. So we have a specific question on sustainability and one on resilience. You will see that in the project sheets, which are sections 04 through 10 in those PDFs that you'll get, and it'll be page 2. We added the environmental lens to the equity lens on the same page to make it easy for staff to produce, but also you can just compare the projects right there. I think it once again affirmed our multimodal approach we're doing, the stormwater approach. Most of the projects are going to have some positive environmental impacts. I listed the fire station because we're trying to do the bay doors, which actually helps with some of the heating and cooling and the operations of the station. I did want to highlight that it did create a robust discussion around synthetic turf. So I think the environmental impact lens did what it was supposed to. We were looking at the physical and mental health coming out of COVID, having fields available 7 by 24 almost, not quite, but much more available because we have synthetic turf than natural turf that needs to rest or get torn up, to the environmental impact. But also within that, even synthetic turf looking, well, it needs less mowing. So we're using less gas producing burning equipment or air blowers. So it was just a really healthy dialogue. So I wanted to acknowledge that and thank the commissioners and also the ESC for pushing these issues. And of course, Kate's tactical support on this. Next. So we did have the work session last fall as the commission had requested and have us more engaged in the CIP throughout the process, just not once a year. So I did want to acknowledge that the operating cost calculator is still in existence, but it needs more refinements. And with this COVID staff workload and vacancies, we have not made much progress on that. We did do the environmental lens. And then I did want to touch base on affordable housing because you did specifically request that it be put in the CIP. So I did a lot of analysis with finance trying to decide the best way to do that since it's not a capital project where we will own and operate facilities. Now, I just said, of course, that we bought Virginia Village units in this last year, but the city and the EDA should not be owning and operating per our charter and state code. So we are working on that long-range plan, how to transition that to a different provider, probably a nonprofit. But I totally appreciate the reasoning for asking for that, to have it highlighted and flagged and regularly funded, because things in the CIP are much more visible and get the community engagement. And that's exactly consistent with the discussion that you just had on the previous development, to be focused and strategic on affordable housing. So I did two things in this. One, you'll see on the 03 tab for general fund, I actually put affordable housing as a line item, and then just cross-reference to look in the affordable housing fund, which is housed, pardon the pun, in the operating budget. We do have a specific affordable housing fund that's standalone, and once money's put into it, it can't just be taken out. It has to go through a formal process. And that's, for example, where the cash in lieu of would go. It goes into that affordable housing fund. So I did want to acknowledge follow up to the commissioner's request during the fall. Also, in between, we did get a very nice list of questions. So thank you, Ms. Comet, for that. Dealing with staff capacity and projects over 3, 5, 10-year trending, sort of new, completed, and deleted. We weren't able to do a full deep dive analysis because we had a couple staff out on extended leave, but I have provided in your staff report, starting at line 158, a chart that starts to give you some estimates in response to that, and we can certainly continue to refine that and welcome further discussion on the 16th. Next slide. For utilities, next slide. What I've put in the slide, let's go for maybe 3 more, Cameron. These are maps that you've seen last year. Put them in there for resources. I think maybe go back 1. Yep, there we go. Perfect, thank you. This is also the summary tab that you'll see in your PDF, so you can blow it up and read larger. I do want to highlight $43 million for sewer and sanitary sewer, combined stormwater and sanitary sewer. The stormwater is $25 million now, and that's reflecting the additional $4 million for the state ARPA. And what's you'll notice when you look at the project sheets and so forth, more detailed, there's a whole lot less debt because we've been able to bring in the $7.4 million of ARPA from the city, and hopefully this next $4 million from the state to really help us work on our stormwater. That federal funding allows us to address both quantity and quality, and so I'll look forward to a deeper dive discussion on the 16th for those projects as desired. The sanitary sewer will look very similar to what we've had before. It's continuing to do the treatment upgrades and capacities with our Arlington and Alexandria treatment plants, and then working to continue relining our existing aging out infrastructure. Next slide. And go 1 more for me, Cameron. And similar to what we saw on the big picture, which just has sort of the funding sources and a quick roll up, this one will give you all of the projects that are public safety information, facilities, and recreation and parks. Here, when you look at Fellows Park, you'll see it's gone from 400 to 500,000, for example, because of costs. The Fire Station 6, the first line is showing 450,000. That's for the bay doors. Now, you will recall 2 years ago now, 550,000 was approved for the bay doors. The cost has literally doubled. We put the debt issue on hold because of COVID. We didn't issue any debt because we weren't not sure what the revenue picture was going to be for the city. And in that time, they've now doubled. So if this is approved, we'll be able to do all 10 doors. If it's not, then Arlington will do the half front doors and not the back. That's a bit problematic for operating and managing two different types of door systems. So staff's recommendation is to approve that. You'll notice that it is in italics, which means debt, and we have run the model and we can afford that. So when we get to the 16th, if there's any specific project you'd like to do a deeper dive on, I'll be glad to, and this will just give me a chance to reinforce that for each of those sections, you'll get a project sheet that just provides a deeper discussion and the funding. And next slide. And one more, please. So for each of the functional areas, I've provided a slide like this that gives you the snapshot of the funding and the project and a few highlights. Continuing to do the park master planning, Fellows property. Design is underway, construction scheduled for 2024. I will note the synthetic turf is green, which is a sign for unfunded, and that is because what we need to do for the synthetic turf is not fully CIP. We're still analyzing it, but it seems like it's more maintenance than CIP. Either way, we need a sustainable funding operating sort of a replacement reserve for this, because every 5 to 8 years we have to be cycling to replace all the fields now that we have 4. Next slide, please. And one more. So this one is the pictures that I like to share and celebrate, but the top right, I was excited to change the tag last year that said under construction to now LEED Silver certified, and the plaque is being ordered. And the plaque for City Hall will actually be mounted in time for, which we have it, for an April celebration that we're hoping to do as part of our honoring of Mr. Dan Z and planting some trees in his honor, working with community groups and ESC and so forth on that. But 2 now LEED certified. Next, please. And one more. Because, of course, we do the general government facilities and the school facilities together. Once again, you get the snapshot up top, a few highlights. For the general government last year, our reinvestment was unfunded. We were able to work to put money into general funds now. It's at $250 a year, which is at least a steady built into the tax base. The staff request and documented need was $310. So there is a known gap, but at least we have a better start. The way we were able to have pay go here is we were able to last Thursday afternoon, or last minute, get some positive news from the state in terms of assistance for WMATA, which lessened the pressure on the transportation fund. And so we were able to do facility reinvestment here, plus some more transportation projects that would have been unfunded. I do want to highlight that here is the community center HVAC. It is $1 million. It's ARPA eligible because it's for air ventilation and air quality, as well as one of the revenue loss categories. So it's very advantageous. The equipment is way past end of life, actually, and we're down to like 1 unit over the gym, and it's duct tape holding it together, and we're just crossing our fingers that we can make it to this CIP, since we have an opportunity to fund it now, because we weren't sure how we were going to do that. The nice thing with that project, because it's the HVAC system, which will be a whole new system, all new ductwork, all new piping, all new catwalk, we actually have to take the whole ceiling out of the gym, and that will allow us to raise it up so basketballs aren't hitting it, but also all the lights will have to come out and we'll replace them with LED lighting. The school facilities are the similars you've seen in previous with the facility reinvestment. That is for things like all the flooring in Mary Ellen Henderson. The HVAC is now we're getting towards end of life. We want to continue to reinvest in that school building. And then the Oak Street project, which is the renovation of the 2012 portion of Oak Street, and then an addition of a central front security entrance, as well as an ADA accessible entrance. There's some windows that need to be replaced in the old one. This was always intended to be debt financed, but you can see that in FY23, there's 1.2 million of a grant that the state looks like they will fund at the request of the schools for that grant. And they also have a federal grant of $1 million for facility reinvestment. So very positive additional grants brought forward for facilities. The rest of the facility reinvestment is noted as green and unfunded, and we will look at end of the year surplus as we've done in past years is how we funded some of the school facilities, but also there's pending legislation in Richmond right now that looks very promising, where they'll be increasing their funding for school facilities and construction, because statewide, significantly aging out facilities. Competitive and how we get the funding back up here is always a challenge, but it is looking promising. There'll be some resources out there. Next. And one more, please. So this one you've seen before, but it really just reinforces how we are leveraging our other grants and matching dollars. Next. And lists a lot of the actual grants. And this shows you how that translates into almost $66.5 million of grant dollars over the 6-year period. So this isn't the 10-year period, 6 years. And that really is leveraging a much lower amount of debt, and then our required CNIE to draw down 30% goes to WMATA. And with the additional news that I mentioned earlier, that it appears we're getting additional state assistance from WMATA, that eased the pressure on a lot of transportation projects and the facility reinvestment that I mentioned. Next. And that just gives you the 10-year planning horizon I mentioned. You can see in the out years, there's almost $90 million of things identified, but that is consistent with the adopted comp plan and area plans and allows us to look for grants and plan for that. So while it's not going to be funded or adopted, it does give us a good planning tool in the transportation world. Assuming we don't get a big transportation grant reduction, which is currently being proposed in the General Assembly budget right now with the grocery tax reduction. Next slide, please. And one more. So this is sort of the policy section of the presentation. A lot of it you're familiar with, so I will go quickly for you. The comp plan, of course, is the whole basis on which we build the CIP. Next. You were good, Cameron. You're reading my mind. Just reinforcing for the community who reads these slides, all the various components of the comp plan, the adopted area plans. And of course, we do make sure the CIP is consistent with the council adopted financial policies as well as the budget guidance. Both of those documents are provided in full in the O2 section of your CIP. Next. As we worked on developing the CIP, we continued to look at infrastructure investment, prioritizing of those needs within that 6 years. A lot of that dealt with financial sustainability. With the ARPA funds and some of the other grants that you saw under transportation, we were really able to maximize those grant dollars, which is reducing and avoiding debt, which is very important for the general fund, but also the enterprise funds to reduce pressure on the rates, especially in the stormwater, since we were committed to and the community has identified those 6 big projects that we've been talking about that are in the CIP. Next. So the pie charts, which are also in section 01 of your CIP, you will see by color and component where we're putting money and investment. And as normal, the Pac-Man pie is mostly transportation. That's the big purple piece. But we are picking up things like IT so that we have more investment in our core infrastructure, which is really important to cybersecurity. And of course, that's very critical always, but even more so now. Next slide. This one picks up all funds. So the previous slide only did the general fund, which included the transportation and schools. This one picks up the utilities, which you can see are the light blue and sort of peachy color. Sanitary is about 12.5% of the CIP, and storm is 5.6%. So that just gives you a visual of where the investments are going back into the community. Next slide. We always look at the fund balance and the debt service against the financial policies. So this chart just shows you in our projections out through FY28 of the CIP. The red line is the policy limit and the fund balance is above that. That has been intentionally, as you will recall, left higher as we went into building the high school and issuing that $120 million debt, and until the economic development project at West Falls pays the next lease portion, which is anticipated to be in April. So if all that stays as planned, which all indications are positive, then that fund balance above the policy can be started to use even more for capital reinvestment. You'll see right now the bars are slightly down. Next slide. And this just shows you the debt services and policy compliance as a percentage of the expenditures. The teal blue is the 12% policy line, and then the 15% is the maximum. And we were close to that when we were initially issuing and starting to deal with the high school, library, and city hall debt issues all at once. And as you can see, as we get into 25 and out, it's below the policy of 12%, which is actually good. You really don't want to be up at the upper limit of that policy. And a lot of that is because of Mary Ellen Henderson debt is coming off. And that gives us more capacity for community priority needs. Next slide. This just takes those charts and puts them into numbers if those of you would prefer the numbers. Once again, this is in section 03 of the CIP. Next slide. And here's the meeting schedule. March 16th is the next time I'll be back with you, and we'll, I guess, be sort of doing a work session, public hearing, and action all in one. And I appreciate the commissioners' commitment and active engagement in the CIP always. As Mr. Starr mentioned earlier, March 28th is when the city manager is presenting the budget to council, so that will be the operating budget and the CIP. There's 2 town halls planned, and this information is on the website as well. Council is scheduled to adopt the budget on May 2nd, and then, which is later than usual. Usually we're towards the end of April, and I would do my report back to you on the outcome in May. I shifted it by a month just because of the total schedule shifting. And then with the concurrence of the commissioners, we'll start sort of the cycle again, and what we started this year with the fall work session as I start preparing with staff the CIP so that you have input earlier in the process versus when I'm delivering the CIP to you. And the next slide. Just for the community and for you all to have the links to the CIP map and the NTC map that's on the website. And next. Providing the links again for the overall budget, the CIP. It will be posted tomorrow this evening. We just made sure that it was posted for you all on Granicus, and how to find me if you have additional emails. And of course, also can go through Mr. Stoddard to me or both of us. And the next one should be just a reminder of sort of what I was going to plan to cover, what we've accomplished, what we're working on, the impact lenses, initial follow-up on the questions that you've provided, the policy guidance, and the schedule. And the next one will be questions and next steps, which I anticipate will be planned for March 16th. And thank you, Chair, for letting me get through the presentation. I know it was quick, and I look forward to talking through more detail on the projects.
Sure, absolutely. We appreciate the presentation. We want to give it short shrift. I think the 16th will be a great opportunity for us to dive deeper into it. I appreciate you sticking with us. And I think this was a good overview, and now we have the materials and we have plenty of time to continue to review them on our own and then get back together again in a couple weeks to have a more substantive discussion. So thank you very much. So, all right. Well, with that, as some serious food for thought, I thanks everyone on the commission for sticking it out on a long night. And I know technically we didn't get to director's reports, Paul, but we'll punt whatever that was. I did look at those attachments to next time, and luckily we did already hit the minutes and we hit the commissioner's reports, and so I believe that takes us to the end of the show here, and I appreciate everyone again sticking it out. And look at that, Melissa, we made it within your 45 minutes. So.
Yep, exactly. 2 minutes left.
So I will officially.
Well, I move that we adjourn.
I agree with that, and I don't even think we need a second and a vote. We're just going to do it. If I had a gavel, which we don't have virtually, I'd thank you. But thank you, everybody, and we'll call this meeting adjourned and see everyone in a few weeks.
Okay.
Good night, all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate.
Thank you, Ms. Master.
You're gonna have to raise your pay for all this extra hours you work. Congratulations.